Manuela Bugefa and Virginia Espejo. On April 23, 1992, 14-year-old Virginia Espejo asked her mother for money, which she intended on using to buy a birthday cake for a party she was attending later that afternoon. However, Virginia never attended the birthday celebration that she'd told her mother about. Instead, she met up with one of her closest friends, 13-year-old Manuela Bugefa, and the pair took the train to Reynosa, about 18 miles from their hometown. They had plans to visit a nightclub and had made sure to hide this fact from their parents. They'd invited a third friend to join them, but she'd declined, opting to stay at home instead. At around 9 p.m., Virginia and Manuela left the club and began to make their way home. Investigators believe that the two girls had decided to hitchhike back after discovering that no return trains were running at that time of night. They were last seen by a witness who was in fact a resident of their hometown and who was unable to offer them a ride as her car was full. She told investigators that she saw the two girls enter a white vehicle described as a Seat 127 with a Valladolid license plate near the town's main street. Manuela and Virginia were never seen again, but there were no indications that the pair planned to run away. They had very little money on them and only wore the clothing on their backs. Nothing was missing from their bedrooms. As the hours passed and the girls failed to come home, their families went to the civil guard but were met with an element of resistance from the agents. Back in 1992, the protocols for missing children were not the same as they are today. The families of Manuela and Virginia were told they'd need to wait 48 hours before a search could be launched. This would later cause the civil guard to receive criticism and backlash, as it's understood that the first 24 hours after an individual goes missing are the most vital. Virginia's sister recalled being told by an agent, "They have gone to a party. They will come back whenever they want." During the early 1990s, a Spanish journalist named Paco Lobaton presented the public service program Who Knows Where, which is similar to the BBC's Crime Watch program in the UK. Viewers could phone into the show with tips and information about unsolved cases, with Who Knows Where focusing specifically on missing person cases. The show aired an episode about Manuela and Virginia, and it received dozens of calls as a result. Alleged sightings placed the girls all over Spain, while other callers appeared to be unwell, cruel hoaxers who said they would bring harm to the girls and that their parents would never see them alive again. Family members traveled as far as Asturias to see if they could track down their missing loved ones, but instead were met with young girls who bore a resemblance to the pair. No trace of the real Manuela and Virginia was ever found. In October of 1994, a group of friends, walking near the Rey que Hadar Reservoir, about 25 miles from where the girls were last seen, found two skulls. Two members of the group were writers for a newspaper that published their findings without analysis or forewarning the families, claiming the skulls could possibly belong to the two missing girls. The lead, after all that, turned out to be a dead end. The skulls did not belong to Manuela and Virginia. They were too old, believed to date back to the 1930s. 3 years later, in 1997, a witness claimed that the girls were in Madrid with what he described as a punk community. He alleged that Manuela had cut her hair short and dyed it blue, with one small white section. Investigators put together composite images of the girls and how they may have looked in 1997, but when they finally located the women the witness had described, it was discovered they were not, in fact, Manuela and Virginia. In 2001, 2 more skulls were discovered, but they were determined to belong to victims of the Civil War. Furthermore, in 2018, a human jawbone was found in a reservoir in Cantabria, but it did not belong to the missing girls. Then in 2021, new hope came for the families of Manuela and Virginia when a woman called into a TV program about unsolved cases to tell them that 1 year before the girls went missing, she and one of her friends had suffered an attempted kidnapping. After alerting the TV show, the woman gave a statement to the civil guard, which led to a new line of inquiry being investigated. The woman and her friend had struggled with the driver, causing him to veer off the side of the road. She and her friend then took the opportunity to flee. The details of the case were chillingly similar to that of Manuela and Virginia. The two women had been hitchhiking and had been picked up by someone in a white Seat 127. More hopeful still, the witness was able to identify the man driving the vehicle, and he became a suspect in the case. He had a criminal record, which included being arrested 4 times for attempted sexual assault. Another suspect came to light around this time, but law enforcement never recovered a photograph of him from 1992. He is described as having been a young man in 1992, between the ages of 20 and 25. Investigators noted that he'd temporarily left the country in August of that year. This suspect reportedly gave conflicting accounts to law enforcement, as he initially denied knowing the girls, but then stated in a later interview with the civil guard that he had been introduced to them at the club by a friend. He then added that he'd never seen the girls again after the brief introductions were made. Over the years, several allegations have been made that the remains of Manuela and Virginia are in the Fontoria mine. An anonymous individual tipped the police off very early on in the investigation, and while their bodies weren't recovered at the time, it has been noted that a thick layer of mud prevented law enforcement from seeing the bottom. Additionally, the nearby Servetus Cave hasn't been searched either, though in 1993, the civil guard reported that it would be an ideal location to hide bodies. In 2021, the case was reopened by the civil guard, but still, Manuela and Virginia and their families are yet to receive justice. Man of Somiedo. On January 11th, 2015, a group of hikers walking by the AS-227 road, less than a mile from the town of Puerto de Somiedo, discovered the dead body of a man in the nearby undergrowth. Investigators arrived promptly on the scene and found the body wrapped inside a blanket, missing one leg, and with no clothing. Upon first glance, there was some indication that he had been taken care of during his final years. His hair had been combed, his beard had been trimmed, and he was clean, with clear skin. This made it confusing to investigators when they noticed his missing leg. Initially, they suspected that John Doe's end had been a violent one. However, it was later determined during the post-mortem that the man's leg had likely gone missing as a result of scavenging animals. The blanket he was found with was analysed, and it was deemed to have been made in the 1950s, carried by only 2 stores in the entire country. Receipt records hadn't been kept, however, meaning the authorities were unable to trace the purchaser. John Doe is described as being incredibly short, at just 4'5". He had a beard, and was likely between the ages of 45 and 60. His body appeared dangerously thin, with one investigator noting that it resembled one of the bodies from the Holocaust. He weighed just 77 pounds. His limbs and fingers were described as being disproportionately long, while his head was unusually small. He also suffered from pectus carinatum, or pigeon chest, a deformity where overgrowth of the cartilage between the ribs and sternum causes the chest to stick out unusually. Furthermore, John Doe's upper back was hunched. There was briefly some speculation that the man suffered from Marfan syndrome, a genetic disorder resulting in an abnormally curved spine, incredibly flexible joints, and long arms, legs, fingers, and toes. Sufferers are often tall and thin, and complications with the heart and aorta can arise from the condition. However, as John Doe was exceptionally short in height, they began to theorize that his growth had been halted by chronic malnutrition. The autopsy showed that John Doe's nutrition had been satisfactory. He was not malnourished, as had been originally theorized. It was also concretely determined through DNA testing that he didn't have Marfan, but suffered from Cockayne syndrome, a rare genetic disorder often featuring growth disorders, intellectual deficits, neuromotor difficulties, and impaired vision and hearing. Children with this condition generally look older than they are, and often don't make it to age 12. There are several variants of Cockayne syndrome. Some adults live to their 20s or even 30s, while others with a milder, slower version of the condition can live to their 40s and 50s. John Doe's odd appearance now made sense, with his strange features lining up with the diagnosis. His cause of death was established as a heart attack. This wasn't uncommon in those with the condition, as it can affect the heart and the aorta. The rarity of John Doe's condition led investigators to believe that it wouldn't take them long to close the case, but they were wrong. They visited Puerto de Somiedo, the nearest town to where the body was found, but found no clues to his identity. Searching further afield yielded no answers either, not even at hospitals and housing facilities. Next, detectives looked into birth records and spoke with gynecologists and midwives who may have helped deliver the baby, but this turned up no new leads. They then attempted to look for women who may have worked as unlicensed rural midwives around his estimated time of birth, but found nothing. Another dead end came when they reached out to construction companies looking for builders who may have created a basement space or a false wall to another room inside a home. Law enforcement began to put together some theories in the absence of answers. They suspected John Doe was from somewhere much further than Somiedo, or that he had been hidden by his family, possibly due to shame or a fear of judgment, and that nobody knew of his existence because he had been locked away for most of his life, being cared for but unacknowledged by those outside the family. As he was likely born between 1955 and 1970, there was also some speculation that he had been born to a single mother. Spain's government was still deeply religious at the time, and an unwed mother would have been met with disapproval and difficulties. If John Doe's mother had been unwed at the time of his birth, she likely hid her pregnancy from everyone and delivered the baby alone or with someone she trusted. To avoid conflict or community backlash, she likely kept the child hidden. Investigators theorized that John Doe had been left somewhere he could easily be found. Had he been left further down the slope, his body likely would have become covered in snow and never been recovered. Authorities believe that whoever had cared for John Doe wanted him to have a proper burial. He was buried with a blank headstone at a local cemetery. While his DNA has been entered into several databases, some of which are international, the real identity of the man of Somiedo remains a mystery. Malin Rodriguez. In Mallorca, on December 2nd, 2013, 15-year-old Malin Rodriguez awoke at 6 a.m. and proceeded to carry out her normal morning routine. She got dressed, had breakfast, and left for school. When the day was over, she hopped onto a bus to get home before realizing that she had left her keys in the house. Since her father was at work and her brother was out, she got off the bus and called her boyfriend, 17-year-old Daniel, asking if she could come and have lunch with him. His parents gave the pair the okay, and she left a message on her father's voicemail, letting him know where she was. Following this, Malin began the journey to Daniel's on her skateboard. She was around 2.5 miles from his home, and many witnesses placed her on the cycle path that day. CCTV showed her at 3:51 p.m. skating towards the village of Son Ferrer. 300 meters ahead of her, at a petrol station, was another CCTV camera still on Malin's route. But the 15-year-old never passed it. She vanished in the section of the cycle path between the two cameras. When Malin didn't show up to Daniel's house, he and his parents became concerned. Soon, a missing persons report was filed. Like the case of Manuela and Virginia, though, investigators seemed to shrug off the concerns of the 15-year-old's loved ones. They believed she was a runaway teenager and refused to begin looking for her until 48 hours had passed. When they finally began to investigate, they found that her mobile phone had run out of battery, so they were unable to trace her this way. An examination of the CCTV from the petrol station, which Malin should have passed but failed to do so, further revealed that the teenager's younger brother had been cycling nearby. In fact, the two should have passed one another as they were riding in the opposite direction, but they never did. Her brother, Bruno, never saw her. Over the next few weeks, authorities combed through wooded areas in search of Malin, using mountain rescue specialists, agents from the Civil Guard, local police, and firefighters. Nearby coastal cliffs were checked, and divers took to the lakes at a neighbouring golf course. No sign of the 15-year-old was discovered. Law enforcement theories about what became of Marlon seem to split into two camps. The camp that thinks she ran away from home, and the camp that believes she met with foul play. By all accounts, Marlon had previously lived a very troubled life. Originally from Argentina, she, her brother and her parents relocated to Mallorca when Marlon was 5. She was described as outgoing and independent, and was a keen rock music enthusiast who hoped to go to art school and dreamed of one day opening her own tattoo studio. However, her family life was heavily troubled. When her parents divorced in 2006, just 3 years after the move to Spain, Marlon and Bruno began living with their father. Marlon's relationship with her mother was said to be difficult, but she was no better off with her father, who was sometimes physically abusive. At some point, Marlon began experimenting with drugs. When she was just 13, her father, Alfonso, discovered her undressed in bed with a boy, and she was horrifically beaten by him to the point that she had to be hospitalized. Several years later, though, she stopped using drugs and began to take care of herself, eventually meeting Daniel, an aspiring musician whom she began dating. Daniel told investigators that in the days before her disappearance, Marlon had been frequently seen crying and had made an appointment with the school counselor the following day. Her friends backed up these statements. This led to some speculation that she was so troubled she decided to leave everything behind. Investigators who believed she met with foul play, however, drew this conclusion from information which indicated that her father was in business with people who were part of organized crime. The son of a drug trafficker he knew offered €3,500 in exchange for the whereabouts of Marlon, but this failed to produce any leads. There are some allegations online that the man who offered the reward began to distance himself from Alfonso afterwards. Her mother, Natalia, was on a trip to Thailand at the time of her daughter's disappearance. In the years since, she has repeatedly voiced her disappointment and frustration with the civil guard for being unable to find any answers in the case. She noted that while her daughter was stubborn, she was also mature. She believes that Marlon was taken by somebody she knew. In the decades since Marlon went missing, no trace of her has ever been found. At the time of her disappearance, 15-year-old Marlon Rodriguez wore red trainers, ripped jeans, and a plaid shirt with a t-shirt underneath. She also wore a denim jacket. When she went missing, she weighed 121 pounds and stood at 5'3". She is described as having long, curly brown hair and brown eyes. If you have any information about Marlon's disappearance, you can call the local missing persons group on +34 642 650 775. Valery Andreev. Born April 10th, 1957, Valery Andreev is better known in his home country of Russia as the Orsk Maniac. Raised in the village of Shalkarsky, not much is documented about Valery's childhood. Upon leaving school, he became a trucker and, on the surface, appeared to live an ordinary and well-intentioned life. He was married, had 2 children, and was not known to abuse substances or alcohol. His friends and family valued him and spoke highly of him. But all that changed in the mid-2000s, when he appeared to begin behaving differently, becoming distant and isolated, preferring to work alone on long-haul drives, and not engaging with his colleagues and friends the way he once did. It wasn't until 2012 that Russian investigators began to suspect there was more to Valery than met the eye. In June that year, 18-year-old Olga Zuravloyeva disappeared. Witnesses last saw the young woman entering a white SUV, and the vehicle was captured on CCTV. It was later spotted in the city of Orsk. Luckily for investigators, the vehicle was far from commonplace. Only 2 such SUVs were registered in the city. One of them belonged to Valery. Investigating the 55-year-old truck driver further, authorities learned that Valery had been in the same location as Olga shortly before she vanished. This could be proven using his mobile phone data. Valery was arrested and detained in connection with Olga's disappearance a month later, but was ultimately released. However, his vehicle, company truck, and garage were all searched during his time in custody, and they showed traces of human DNA and blood. When his colleagues were approached, they reported that they had assumed the trucker had begun to use the services of sex workers because contraceptives, jewelry, women's underwear, hair accessories, and other feminine items were often found in his vehicle. Valeri was asked to appear for questioning again, but he didn't come to the police station. He was last heard from on July 6, 2012, when he contacted his wife and has not been seen or heard from since. Valeri's profession as a long-haul truck driver allowed him to access all sorts of routes and different areas of the country. After he was reported missing, an extensive search was launched with the aim that he could be tracked down before he attempted to leave the country, but no sign of him was ever found. The remains of his last confirmed victim, Olga, were found on September 10, 2013. In the years since he vanished, law enforcement has received dozens of calls and messages about possible sightings of Valeri, which indicate that he may still be in Russia or as nearby as Kazakhstan. Several areas in and around Russia have been searched in response to the tips received by investigators, but so far, the authorities have come away empty-handed each time. One of the most recent sightings of Valeri was in October 2019, when he was positively identified in the Luga district of the Leningrad Oblast region of Russia. The witness who saw him reported the sighting to several law enforcement bodies, but despite residents of the area confirming that they had also seen him, no actions were taken to capture and detain Valeri by the Ministry of Internal Affairs or the Investigative Committee. At the end of that year, Interpol decided to take up the search for the elusive serial killer. In 2020, when Interpol announced they were searching for Valeri, he was placed at the top of their list of wanted fugitives. A reward, the equivalent of $20,000, was offered for information on his whereabouts. In 2021, a witness reported seeing Valeri near Moscow. Valeri is now aged 65 and is linked to the rapes and murders of 8 women. However, he is suspected of killing more than 100 women between 2006 and 2016. If he was truly responsible for such a horrific number of crimes, then Valeri would be Russia's deadliest serial killer, and one of the worst in the world. Valeri Andreev is still missing. He is described as a white male with greying hair who stands at 5 foot 6 inches tall. He has a 5 centimeter scar on his abdomen. He is currently 65 years old. If you have any information about Valeri's whereabouts, you can contact your local police station or use the Interpol message form, which will be linked in the description. Sharon Kinney. Sharon Elizabeth Hall was born on November 30th, 1939, in Independence, Missouri, to parents Eugene and Doris. Following her birth, Sharon spent some time growing up in Washington state, but by the age of 15, she and her family had returned to her birthplace. In 1956, now aged 16, she met 22-year-old Brigham Young University student James Kinney at a church function. The couple dated from the summer that year until the autumn, when James returned to university. However, shortly after his departure, Sharon penned the 22-year-old a letter explaining that she had fallen pregnant with his child. James felt it was his responsibility to now look after Sharon and the child, and so he returned to Independence, and the couple married on October 18, 1956. Sharon's age was falsely listed as 18 at the time. About a year after they married, the pair had a second, more formal wedding. By this time, Sharon, who had not actually been pregnant in the first place, had explained away her lack of baby by claiming she'd miscarried. However, she did eventually end up pregnant, giving birth to a daughter named Dana in the autumn of 1957. Following their second wedding ceremony, Sharon and James spent some time living in Provo, Utah, before returning to Independence, where they both got jobs, Sharon as a babysitter and James as an electrical engineer at Bendix Aviation, where he mostly worked nights. Sharon was keen on a life of luxury. She often spent large sums of money on frivolous things and attempted to live well beyond her means. She and James initially lived in a rented home next to his parents, but eventually built their own home, a ranch-style house, elsewhere in the city. Eventually, Sharon grew restless. She'd had another baby, a boy named Troy, and she'd become bored of being a mother and a wife, and yearned for excitement. As her husband was always working nights, she turned her attention to other men and began engaging in affairs. One of these relationships was with an old high school friend, John Bolditz. By 1960, James was considering divorcing Sharon. He suspected that she was carrying on with other men and was also frustrated by her reckless spending habits. On March 18th, he spoke with his parents about the matter. Devout Mormons, James's parents encouraged him to stay and make their marriage work. He told them that Sharon would agree to the divorce if she was able to retain the house, keep custody of their daughter, and he paid her $1,000 in alimony. Still, James's parents insisted that the couple had simply hit a rough patch and just needed time to sort things out together. The next day, at around 5:30 p.m., Sharon heard a gunshot ring out from the direction of the master bedroom. She would later tell the police that when she went to investigate, she discovered the couple's 2-year-old daughter, Dana, sitting on the bed next to her father. He had a gunshot wound to his head, and Dana was holding his .22 caliber handgun. According to Sharon, James must have been cleaning the weapon when he decided to take a nap. He must have left the gun out as he went to sleep. Emergency services were promptly called to the scene, but James was declared dead by the time he arrived at the hospital. After his death, law enforcement began to investigate the incident. They were unable to obtain prints from the pistol's grip, however, and then failed to carry out testing for gunshot residue on both Sharon and Dana. Speaking with friends and relatives of the family, investigators discovered that the 2-year-old was known to play with firearms unattended, and in a test carried out by the police, Dana proved her ability to pull the trigger on a gun, which was the same make and model of her father's. As there was no evidence to prove it was anything else, James's death was ruled as an accidental homicide. After the investigation was closed, James was buried, and his wife collected on his life insurance policies, which were both the modern-day equivalent of around $230,000. Using this money, Sharon bought herself a new Ford Thunderbird from a car salesman named Walter T. Jones on April 18th. Walter and Sharon began an affair shortly thereafter. While Sharon wanted to get married again and thought Walter would be the perfect second husband, he already had a wife, 23-year-old Patricia Jones, his high school sweetheart with whom he had 2 children. In May that year, Sharon asked Walter to go to Washington with her. However, he declined her offer, and so she took her brother Eugene instead. Upon her return, she met up with her boyfriend and told him that she was pregnant with his baby. Sharon was sure that this would tip the scale in her favor, that Walter would have a strong reason to leave his wife and be with her, but Walter didn't announce that he would divorce his wife. Instead, he ended the couple's affair. Following the breakup on May 26th, Sharon decided to call Patricia and tell her that her husband was having an affair with Sharon's sister. The pair met to discuss the situation that evening, and according to Sharon, she dropped Patricia off a few blocks from home afterwards. But Walter reported that his wife never made it back to their house. He alerted the police to her uncharacteristic disappearance the following morning. Once he had notified the authorities, he began to call Patricia's friends and loved ones, looking for somebody who may have seen her. One of her friends, who carpooled to and from work with her, informed him that the 23-year-old had discussed being approached by a woman who wanted to meet her. Patricia asked the carpool driver to drop her on a street corner in Independence, and the friend had noticed another woman waiting in a car nearby. They didn't recognize the woman, but gave Walter her description, which was immediately familiar to him. After hanging up, Walter called Sharon and asked if she had seen or spoken with his wife. She admitted that she had, and informed him that she'd told Patricia of the affair. She then claimed that she'd last seen the 23-year-old when she dropped her off near their house. Sharon said that Patricia began speaking with an unknown man in a green 1957 Ford shortly before Sharon drove off. Walter and Sharon met later that evening, where he insisted that she provide more details about Patricia's last known movements. He would later admit that he had threateningly held a key to Sharon's throat. That same day, on May 27th, shortly before midnight, Sharon and John Bolditz, whom she had an ongoing affair with, discovered Patricia's body in a secluded lover's lane outside the city. She had been shot 4 times by a .22 caliber pistol, sustaining 2 wounds to her shoulder and 1 to her abdomen. The fatal shot was to Patricia's head. The bullet entered near her mouth at an upwards trajectory. She is estimated to have died at 9 p.m. on May 27th. Powder burns on the hemline of Patricia's skirt, which had been pushed up to her waist, indicated that the gun had been fired at close range at least once, and a white powdery substance discovered in her hair led investigators to initially theorize that she had been killed elsewhere and dumped in the secluded area. However, it was later determined that the substance was fly eggs. As no other crime scene could be located, the notion that this was not the crime scene was dismissed. Authorities attempted to locate the murder weapon and the bullet which had passed through Patricia's abdomen. They searched the Lover's Lane with the help of a group of Boy Scouts, but they were never able to recover the weapon, despite going so far as to empty nearby bodies of water. The bullet, however, was eventually discovered buried in the ground, underneath the body. On May 28th, Walter, Sharon, and John were all questioned. Both John and Walter admitted to dating Sharon in written statements. On June 1st, they both took polygraph tests, which they passed. Sharon, however, would not put anything down in writing and refused to take a polygraph. Her brother, Eugene, was also questioned on March 31st, although he opted not to talk to investigators. That same day, at 11 p.m., Sharon was arrested for Patricia's murder. The Jackson County Sheriff caught wind of her arrest and asked the prosecutors to consider a second murder, that of James Kinney. Following her arrest, Sharon was released on a $20,000 bond. Her preliminary hearing was scheduled for June 16th. Meanwhile, the gun used in the death of her husband was ruled out as being the murder weapon in Patricia's case. It was still locked up and under the possession of the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Reportedly, after James's death, Sharon attempted to get the gun back, but it was never returned to her. A male friend of hers then came forward and admitted that he had purchased a .22 caliber handgun for the widow and registered it under her name, but she had asked him to re-register it under another. However, the weapon couldn't be found inside her house. Sharon originally claimed that she had lost it on her trip to Washington, then recanted this story and said it had gone missing at some point. In mid-June, Sharon's trial was delayed as she was heavily pregnant with her third child. She gave birth to a second daughter, Marla, on January 16, 1961. On June 13, 1961, Sharon's trial for the murder of Patricia Jones began. The prosecution cited both Walter and a police lieutenant named Harry Nesbitt as evidence of the motive behind the crime. Nesbitt recalled that Sharon had stated, "I was afraid I was losing him. He acted funny." Meanwhile, Walter told the court about how he had broken off the relationship after Sharon told him that she was pregnant. The prosecution alleged that Patricia had been killed because Sharon wanted Walter all to herself. However, they were unable to firmly establish if she owned, or had once owned, the handgun that killed the 23-year-old. After calling 27 witnesses, the prosecution rested its case on June 21st. Meanwhile, Sharon's defense team focused on breaking down the motive and means of the crime, claiming the mother of three had no reason to kill Patricia, and stating that the weapon that allegedly belonged to her had not been proven to be the murder weapon. The jury spent just over an hour and a half deliberating before acquitting Sharon of the charge. They had found too many loopholes in the prosecution's case. Bizarrely, immediately after the verdict was announced, one juror asked Sharon for her autograph. She obliged before she was returned to jail to await the next trial. On January 8, 1962, the jury selection process began for Sharon's second murder trial. The prosecution's case heavily relied on their contention that she was so interested in seeing her husband gone from her life that she was willing to pay for it. They had John Bolditz testify about the time that Sharon had offered to pay him $1,000 to kill her husband. However, John undermined his own testimony by claiming that Sharon may have been joking. This caused the prosecution to attack the character of their own witness. The prosecution also explained that James and Sharon's marriage was on the verge of breaking down at the time of his death, and noted that she'd been engaging in extramarital affairs, which had caused the divide between the couple. They pointed out that Sharon would only be able to collect James's life insurance money if she was still his wife. Sharon's defense, for their part, focused on the fact that much of the evidence in the case was circumstantial, and called John Bolditz a poor, mixed-up kid who would sign anything, and attacked the reliability of his testimony. They also observed that the police, during their original investigation, had thought James's demise was obviously accidental, and presented testimony which supported the idea that James had often left guns in reach of his children, and that Dana could pull triggers on toy guns which were stiffer than the one on the .22 caliber, which had killed him. The jury deliberated for over 5.5 hours before returning a guilty verdict on January 11th. In April, Sharon was sentenced to life in prison and began to serve time in the Missouri Reformatory for Women. Her deceased husband's family continued to believe that Dana had been responsible for the death and that it had been nothing more than a tragic accident, stating, "We still don't feel that she committed murder." Sharon, for her part, told reporters that the verdict was a mistake. A week after her conviction, Sharon's lawyers requested that she be released on bond, which was supported by a petition signed by 132 individuals who thought she was innocent. However, the motion was denied, as first-degree murder was not a bailable offense. In response, Sharon's defense then requested that the conviction be vacated, because the jury had delivered a verdict based on surmise and speculation, rather than substantial evidence. They went on to list some errors that they alleged had been made before and during the trial. While this was denied by a judge in April 1962, the Missouri Supreme Court reversed the conviction in March 1963. A new trial was ordered on the basis of Sharon's defense having been denied adequate preemptory challenges during jury selection. She was denied bail in May that year, but 2 months later was released on a $25,000 bond which had been posted by her brother. As her second trial was scheduled, Sharon and her 3 children moved in with her mother. Her next trial began on March 23, 1964, but a mistrial was declared shortly afterwards because a law partner of one of the prosecutors had once been retained by one of the jurors. Sharon's third trial started on June 29th that year. A new witness testified for the prosecution, a female acquaintance of the mother of 3, who stated Sharon once joked that the witness should, quote, "get rid of the woman's old man, like Sharon did." During this trial, Sharon took the stand to declare that she was innocent of all charges. A second mistrial was declared when the jury deadlocked 7-5 in favor of acquittal. Her fourth trial was scheduled for October of 1964. However, while free on bail, Sharon traveled to Mexico with her alleged new lover, a man named Francis Pugliese. She left her children in the care of their grandfather and traveled under the pretense that she and Francis were a married couple, using the name Jeanette Pugliese. Technically, although the bail itself wouldn't have prevented Sharon from traveling out of the state, the company that posted her bail prohibited her from doing so without explicit written consent from themselves. Thus, her going out of state went against the conditions the company had set. In Mexico, Sharon and Francis registered as a married couple at Hotel Gin. While in the country, Sharon purchased a weapon, claiming that she felt unsafe as she was unfamiliar with Mexico. However, she and Francis had also brought 1 to 2 weapons with them across the border, so it's unclear why Sharon required a third gun. On the night of September 18th, 1964, the mother of 3 left the hotel alone. While out, she encountered Francisco Ordóñez, a Mexican-born US citizen, at a bar. She went back to his hotel with him, later telling the police that he had wanted to show her some photographs he had taken. However, in the hotel room, Sharon claimed, Francisco made sexual advances towards her, and so she fired her gun at him in self-defense. She stated that she simply wanted to scare him off. Instead, she shot him in the chest, killing him immediately. The sound of the gunfire drew the attention of a hotel employee, who entered the room and narrowly avoided being killed by Sharon too. The employee was shot in the shoulder, and he promptly fled the scene, closing the door behind him, locking Sharon in the room until authorities arrived. The police did not believe Sharon's version of events. They suspected that she had attempted to rob Francisco and had shot him when he didn't comply. She was quickly arrested for homicide and assault with a deadly weapon. The mother of 3 maintained that she didn't want to hurt anybody, but had to defend herself. The police discovered the gun and ammo in her handbag, and further guns and ammo in the hotel room she was sharing with Francis. Francis was also arrested. His crimes included entering the country illegally and carrying an unlicensed firearm. One of the weapons retrieved from the hotel was found to be the same one which had killed Patricia Jones, but because Sharon had been acquitted, she could not be retried for this crime. Both Frances and Sharon were tried in the summer of 1965. Frances was cleared and deported back to the US, while Sharon was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison. She attempted to appeal her conviction, but was given a further 3 years behind bars, as the court didn't believe that she'd been given a long enough sentence. In jail, she was nicknamed the Gunfighter, a name which was soon after adopted by the media. On December 7th, 1969, 4 years after her conviction, Sharon was found to be not present for the 5 p.m. roll call in prison. However, her absence was not noted until a few hours later. It wasn't until 2 a.m. that her disappearance and presumed escape were reported to the Mexico City police. A large-scale manhunt ensued in the days following Sharon's vanishing act. The police suspected that she may have been going to visit a former inmate whom she had grown close with, but they also notified the US authorities, including the FBI, in case she attempted to make her way back home. Authorities initially believed that the prison guards had been bribed to look the other way as Sharon made her escape from prison. An atypical blackout had occurred around the time she vanished, and a door had been left unsecured when it should have been locked. Additionally, there were fewer guards on duty at the time. Theories began circulating about what may have happened to the mother of 3. Some suggested that her mother had helped her escape, others that she had a boyfriend who was in the police force, and he had been responsible for helping her flee. In the years since, it has been suggested that she disguised herself as a man to leave the prison and the country, while a 2002 article from the Southeast Missourian suggests that Francisco's family had helped her escape so they could kill her. The search for Sharon lasted until December 18th. Investigators said they suspected that she had gone to Guatemala, although it's unclear how they reached this conclusion. Sharon had become fluent in Spanish due to her time in prison, and authorities believed this would help her blend in better and allow her to go anywhere where Spanish was the main spoken language. In December of 1969, investigators announced that they'd run out of leads in the case. After her failure to turn up for her 4th trial in October of 1964, a warrant for Sharon's arrest was issued. In 2010, it was still outstanding, and was, at the time, the oldest outstanding murder warrant known to exist in the Kansas City area. Sharon Kinney's fate is still unknown. She is described as a white woman with grey eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she weighed 125 pounds and had blonde hair. She is 5'7" and has a skin pigmentation disease with a red port wine scar on the left side of her face. If she is still alive, she will be 83 years old. Paddy Moriarty was born on March 30th, 1947, in the village of Croom, County Limerick, Ireland. He was likely conceived out of wedlock and, according to The Australian, was possibly raised as a foster child. At the age of 18, he emigrated to Australia and later worked as a station hand, ringer, and grader driver. In 2008, he moved to Larimer and purchased a vacant service station 2 years later for $30,000. Paddy was last seen on December 16, 2017. By then, he was a regular fixture at the Larimer Hotel, which featured a crocodile named Sneaky Sam in a pool out back, as well as what is described as a makeshift zoo containing dozens of different birds. Paddy was an employee at the hotel at the time of his disappearance, telling engaging, colourful tales to tourists at the bar. He reportedly drank his typical 8 to 10 beers that evening before climbing onto his quad bike. His faithful dog Kelly hopped up next to him, and they set off to make the 800-meter journey back home. The last person to see Paddy and Kelly was a tourist who offered the canines some chicken for dinner. When Paddy didn't report for work the next day, locals began to suspect that he'd had an accident, been bitten by a snake, or fallen into a sinkhole. All of these were common in the remote Australian outback. Police were called to the town several days later, and their first course of action was to investigate the 70-year-old's home. Though there was no sign of Paddy or Kelly, they found his 2 hats, keys, bank card, medication, and a plate of food that was ready to be consumed. Furthermore, his quad bike was out the front. Coroner Greg Kavanaugh later noted that Paddy was bald and self-conscious about the shape of his head. He would always go out with a hat on. Examining the evidence as part of a 2022 inquest, Kavanaugh reported, "It appeared that in the midst of a meal preparation, something unexpected happened, but not such that he did not have time to close the door and put the mat and Besser block in place." Law enforcement also believed that if Paddy had met with an accident or wandered off, they would be able to find Kelly. Because the canine was missing though, they suspected that someone had taken both Paddy and his dog. Incredibly, in a town of 12 people, nobody had seen a thing. With no surveillance footage and no physical evidence, investigators struggled to figure out how a man and his dog could disappear in such a minuscule community. Authorities combed the area on foot and by car, even bringing in helicopters at one point. They searched through caverns, dumps, and the dam, and interviewed all the remaining residents of Larimer, but found no leads. One of the most notable residents of the town is Fran Hodgetts, who ran a tea house and pie shop on the Sturt Highway. Paddy lived opposite the tea house and had known Hodgetts for 3 decades. Though the two were initially on good terms, all that changed when Hodgetts divorced her husband and Paddy took his side during the split. Hodgetts would later accuse the 70-year-old of stealing her property, threatening her customers, and even killing her plants. In 2016, they signed a court-ordered mediation letter, agreeing to be polite and limit their interactions with one another. But the peace didn't last, and the two became embroiled in more fallouts in the following months when Hodgetts hired Owen Laurie as a gardener. Words exchanged between Laurie and Paddy included more allegations of plant murder. Just days before Paddy vanished, he reportedly fought with Laurie. According to reports, Laurie had told Paddy, "You need to shut that effing dog up, or I'll shut it for you." To which Paddy replied, "Shut your mouth or I'll take your knees out from under you." A witness, the hotel barman, advised Paddy to be careful. He simply replied, "It's all good, I've got a baseball bat." Still, Laurie denied knowing what became of the 70-year-old after he went missing. He stated that he never saw Paddy come home that night, despite being in a phone box with a clear view when the elderly man arrived home. Laurie argued he was too old to hurt someone. He was 71, and stated, "I'd break all my bloody bones. I have osteoporosis." Hodgetts, meanwhile, denied rumors that she had killed Paddy, chopped up his corpse, and put it in her famous pies. Investigators made sure to thoroughly check her incinerator and septic tank, but found no evidence of Paddy or Kelly. Hodgetts told police that though she'd talked about killing the 70-year-old, she'd only been joking. Her ex-husband, Bill, noted that he had had a beer with Paddy on the night he vanished, and he was going to let him borrow his lawnmower, but he never showed up to collect it. When asked by the media what he thinks happened to Paddy, he stated, "I haven't got a clue, but whoever done it, they done a bloody good job of it." In 2021, police offered a $250,000 reward for information that would help solve the case, though it brought in no new leads. In the spring of 2022, an inquest was held where coroner Greg Kavanaugh stated his belief that both Paddy and Kelly had died sometime on the night of their disappearance. "In my opinion," he said, "Paddy and his dog were killed in the context of, and likely due to, the ongoing feud he had with his nearest neighbor." Kavanaugh suggested that upon coming home, Paddy began sorting out food for both he and Kelly, and that the two stepped outside at some point during the evening. Kavanaugh continued, "There is no evidence as to where he went. However, in my view, it's likely that the new plants at Fran's place were of some attraction to him." The inquest also heard 8 audio recordings, featuring a man identified as Owen Laurie singing and talking about the killing. The recordings had been made in secret by the police. One recording features a man's voice saying, "Effing killed Paddy, hit him on the head, smacked him on the effing nostrils with my claw hammer," and "I killerated old Paddy. I struck him on the effing head and killerated the bastard, basherated him." In another, the same man says, "Well, they didn't effing find the hammer, well, they can't get me for anything," And you gotta find out who effing done it, mate. That's if you don't find the effing body to find out who done it. I can tell you, you are not finding out. I tell you effing repeatedly, you are not finding out. You are not finding out. The recordings had been gathered by police in the 6 months after the disappearance and had been recorded in Laurie's own home. Laurie, though, disputed that the voice on the tape was his. He claimed that it wasn't, and stated again that he knew nothing of Paddy's disappearance. He then determined that he should stay silent, so that nothing he said could be misconstrued or incriminate him. It also emerged at the inquest that 2 other allegations had been regarding Paddy's disappearance. One of them came from an individual named Wayne Ledwidge, who claimed that in 2017 he had overheard a conversation between his friend, Brian Roberts, who is now deceased, and Fran Hodgetts. He alleged that Hodgetts had offered Roberts $10,000 to get rid of Paddy. Hodgetts, who spent time in Melbourne while receiving cancer treatment, denied that any such conversation took place and denied knowing Roberts, stating, "I never, ever, ever paid anyone to bump Paddy off. I swear on my mother and father's grave. I don't know him and I never said that." Notably, Hodgetts struggled to explain to investigators how $30,000 of cash she kept in a freezer had decreased to $7,000 by the time they found it, leading to some suspicions that she had paid somebody off. Meanwhile, a truck driver named Michael Panqui told the court that he believed Roberts had been involved with another death that had occurred back in 2001. However, investigators have been unable to find corroborating evidence for the claim. In 2005, another man was arrested and convicted of the 2001 murder. To this day, the remains of Paddy and Kelly have never been found. There has been no further progress in the case, and it's unclear what became of the two on the night of their disappearance. Fran Hodgetts returned to Larimer in late 2022 following her cancer treatment. Her grandson, Brent Celia, currently runs her tea house and has spoken about the way his grandmother was treated following the disappearance. Speaking with ABC News, he stated, "There's been a world of abuse as people drive past the house. Also phone calls. People have called her and said stuff to her. There's been vandalism all over the shop. People have painted over signs that I repainted over, and rubbish gets thrown and stuff goes missing from under the house." He noted that much of the mistreatment came from outsiders, not Larimer residents. The way she has to live now and seclude herself is making her feel lonely and depressed, and emotionally in a bad way. Around this same time, the Northern Territory Public Trustee announced that it intended to administer Paddy's estate, meaning it could be sold off. Celia said, "If it gets sold and fixed up, then it won't be that place anymore." Since Paddy's disappearance, 2 residents have died. Barry Sharp, the owner of the pub, and Bill Hodgetts, Fran's ex-husband. Fran, for her part, has stated that Larimer is a better place without Paddy, but continues to insist that she is not responsible for his disappearance. She has, though, admitted to having her own suspicions about Owen Laurie, who has never been charged with Paddy's murder due to a lack of evidence, most notably a lack of a body. She claimed that his behavior following the disappearance led her to sack him as her gardener. Hodgetts told Digital Spy, "I don't like to blame somebody for something they didn't do, but I was worried because Owen said to me, 'Something's going to happen.' Also, when they were searching across the road, he said to me, 'I thought they came for me.' I didn't say nothing to him, but I thought, 'Oh my God, why would he say that?' I just put 2 and 2 together, and that's why I sacked him and told him to go." Hodgetts told the Washington Post that she wasn't sorry Paddy was gone, and that his disappearance had done some good for the town, stating, "Well, it's put Larimer on the map, hasn't it?" Bas-Jan Adder. On July 9th, 1975, 33-year-old Bas-Jan Adder, a Dutch conceptual and performance artist and photographer, set off from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in a 13-foot modified pocket cruiser named Ocean Wave. Bas-Jan aimed to single-handedly cross the North Atlantic from west to east. If he succeeded, his boat would be the smallest to cross the Atlantic. He believed the journey, which he had been carefully planning for months, would take him around 2.5 months. He planned to reach Falmouth, England, and from there he would travel to the Netherlands for an exhibition of his work. Not only did he aim to check off a sailing goal, but his voyage would also be part of an art project he was working on, which he named In Search of the Miraculous, a reference to a book of the same name by P.D. Ouspensky. His wife, Mary Sue Anderson Adder, in a piece written for the Brooklyn Rail in 2022, recalled that Bas Jan, an enthusiastic sailor, had once sailed from Morocco to California with the owner of a 70-year-old, 45-foot wooden ketch. The two men had endured a hurricane, 2 broken masts, a failed engine, and no radio or navigation equipment. Their extraordinary tale of survival was proven when the US Navy towed the mastless ketch into San Diego port. Before he disembarked on this new voyage, Mary Sue recalled feeling afraid, telling Bas Jan that it was too dangerous. "I don't want to lose you." He informed her that, "You are stuck with me for the next 50 years. No ocean can get in the way." She wrote in 2022, "The sea was my only competition. He trusted me, and he trusted the ocean. It would never harm him." Mary Sue waited for her husband to come home, but he never did. On April 18th, 1976, around 150 nautical miles from the southwest coast of Ireland, the team, manning a Spanish fishing trawler, stumbled across a small sailing boat, floating aimlessly across the surface of the sea. Its bow completely submerged as it drifted vertically. The trawler's crew subsequently hauled the craft on board and searched its cabin, finding canned goods, sailing equipment, and several IDs. The boat was Ocean Wave and belonged to Bas Jan Adder. Barnacles attached to the boat's hull indicated that the craft had been drifting for around 6 months. There was no sign of Bas Jan, and his camera and notebooks, which he'd taken to document the journey, were missing. Mary Sue soon heard from Interpol, who asked her if she was the wife of Bas Jan Adder. Her details had been found amongst the papers still on board the Ocean Wave. When she was told that the craft had been found, Mary Sue recalled that she numbly listened and asked for details. There was a big hole in the back wall of the cabin, which Bas Jan's safety lines would have been attached to, and the rigging was missing. Shortly afterwards, Mary journeyed to Spain with her husband's brother, Eric. The Dutch embassy then revealed that the Ocean Wave had vanished. It had been stolen from the boatyard belonging to the trawler's captain. Bas Jan's brother, Eric, an accomplished sailor himself, has suggested that the hole in the boat left by the removal of the wall to which Bas Jan's lifeline would have been attached was likely the result of the fixed point being ripped out by Bas Jan falling overboard in bad weather conditions. Eric reached this conclusion after interviewing people in Spain who saw Ocean Wave before it went missing. Still, to this day, it's unclear what became of Bas Jan. The Ocean Wave has never been located. CAS 2. On April 15, 2007, the CAS 2, a 32-foot catamaran, set sail from Airlie Beach with 3 men on board, all of whom were residents of Perth, Western Australia. The men included 56-year-old Derek Baton, 69-year-old Peter Tunstead, and 63-year-old James Tunstead. While most of the men were fairly inexperienced sailors, Derek had undertaken a sailing course and had journeyed several times on the CAS 2 prior to April 15th. That day, the men planned to head to Townsville, Queensland, but ultimately wanted to sail the CAS 2 around Northern Australia to Western Australia. For 2 days, there was nothing amiss. It wasn't until April 18th that trouble seemed to make itself known, when a helicopter spotted the boat adrift near the Great Barrier Reef and reported that the CAS 2 was in distress. 2 days later, authorities caught up with the boat and discovered there was nobody on board. An employee at the Queensland Emergency Management Office reported what they found was a bit strange in that everything was normal. There was just no sign of a crew. The Queensland Emergency Management Office later noted that the boat was in adequate condition. Furthermore, Food and tableware had been laid out. A laptop was turned on and sitting undisturbed on a surface. The boat's engine was still running, and the radio and GPS were both in full working order. Even the life jackets were still in place, untouched, and the Kaz 2's anchor was up. The only obvious sign of something having gone wrong was that the boat's sails had been shredded. Though there was no life raft on board, it's unclear if there was one before the men set off. The same day the boat was spotted by the helicopter pilot, search and rescue efforts began. A Navy aircraft helped in the search, as did Bowen Voluntary Marine Rescue. At night, an aircraft with infrared abilities was dispatched, and the following day, a full-scale search and rescue effort was launched. Despite the efforts of authorities, though, no sign of the men was found. Experts noted that it would be very unlikely that the members of the Kaz 2 crew were alive, given how much time had passed since they'd gone into the water. On April 21st, the search was called off. A forensic examination of the Kaz 2 was soon carried out, though no evidence was ever found that would indicate foul play or third-party involvement. In a sealed container beneath Derek and Baton's bed, they discovered a firearm and ammunition, none of which appeared to be missing. The boat's GPS revealed that on April 15th, the Kaz 2 was steered northeast into an area where rough seas and sharp winds were strengthening, and later that day, the boat was adrift. In early August 2008, an inquest into the disappearance was held, led by Queensland State Coroner Michael Barnes. 27 witnesses testified, and 107 pieces of evidence were submitted. Notably, Derek's wife, Jennifer, was adamant about her husband's habits of putting safety first. Derek had experience with sailing and had been around boats for 25 years. He had taken several sailing courses over the years, including one shortly before the Kaz 2 departed, and had a qualification in marine radio. She and Derek had travelled on various motorboats every summer, and they'd taken the Kaz 2 out a few times before Derek departed with his friends. The men meticulously planned the trip for months, allowing themselves 6 to 8 weeks to get back to Fremantle, noting that they did not want to sail at night for safety reasons. The inquest also heard from the Kaz 2's previous owner, who noted that the boat was in good working order, and he had helped Derek, James, and Peter plan their route. 2 days before the helicopter spotted the Kaz 2 adrift, the skipper of a fishing vessel recalled seeing a white yacht resembling the Kaz 2 with a torn sail drifting sideways through a narrow passage near Bowen. Gavin Howland, the skipper, recalled that he came within 50 meters of the boat, but was unable to see anyone on board. Though he thought it was strange, he admitted that he didn't contact the authorities as it did not occur to him the crew might be in distress. Queensland State Coroner Michael Barnes wrote that he cannot be so definitive about the circumstances under which the deaths occurred, but he did propose a theory as to what happened to the crew members of the Kaz 2 on April 15, 2007. He suggested that since a fishing lure was discovered entangled in the port side rubber, and a recovered video recording from the boat that morning showed Peter fishing, Peter tried to free the lure and fell overboard. James then jumped in after him as he was unable to climb aboard, leaving Derek still on the ship. When Derek went to drop the sails, which he needed to do to turn back for his friends, the ship's movements or the wind could have knocked the boom, which in turn knocked Derek overboard. In seconds, the boat would have been out of their reach, and without life jackets, the men likely would have struggled in the turbulent sea. There have, however, been several other theories proposed over the years. Townsville authorities noted that the weather worsened just after the Kaz 2 departed. The sea had been rough and the winds sharp. This led to some speculation that the 3 men had gone overboard due to the bad conditions. But relatives of the men have pushed back against this, noting that their fishing lines and laundry were set out when the boat was found, and their life jackets were still stowed, suggesting that whatever had happened had not been something they'd been prepared for. Additionally, the items found inside the boat did not bear the signs of bad weather. Everything inside was neatly placed and had not been moved by the rough seas. It has also been theorized that the men willingly or unwillingly moved on to another boat. This is because the CAS-2 was discovered with its fenders out, suggesting it may have docked with another vessel. However, Townsville investigators noted that small boats often left their fenders out at all times, so nothing could be concluded from the fact that the fenders were out at all. Other theories in the case include a faulty GPS leading them astray, the CAS-2 becoming stuck on a sandbar near George Point, where their last radio message was made, a freak wave knocking them overboard, or even that the men staged their own disappearances for insurance purposes. It is worth noting that this final theory has no supporting evidence, however. What exactly happened to the crew of the CAS-2 remains a mystery to this day. Since the events of April 15, 2007, the boat has been dubbed the Ghost Yacht and the modern-day Mary Celeste. Donald Crowhurst. On October 31st, 1968, 36-year-old Donald Crowhurst set off from Tynemouth, England, to begin his journey as part of the Golden Globe race. The event was a non-stop, single-handed, round-the-world yacht race, and the first of its kind. Sponsored by the British newspaper The Sunday Times, the race was open to anyone. Skill level was not an issue, unlike many other races and sailing events at the time, which required entrants to demonstrate their abilities before they could be approved for entry. The winner would receive a trophy and £5,000, the equivalent of around £108,000 today. At the time of his departure, Donald was a father of 4, a businessman, a member of Bridgewater Borough Council, and an amateur sailor. The boat he built for the Golden Globe race was named the Tynemouth Electron, a modified 40-foot trimaran, and he remortgaged his home to help pay the costs of building it. Reportedly, this type of boat was not commonly used for the kind of lengthy journey he'd be embarking on, and it was unclear how well it would serve Donald. At the time, trimarans could become slow if overloaded and had difficulty sailing close to the wind. Before he disembarked, Donald attempted to put together safety devices to help ensure his victory, or at least his survival. He hoped that he could prove his inventions useful by completing the race, and planned to manufacture and sell the devices upon his return to England. However, he had only a brief period of time to build the boat, secure finances and sponsors for the race, and finish the equipment. As a result, most of his safety measures were left incomplete. Though he planned to finish them en route, he never did. One experienced sailor, who spent a few days with Donald before his departure, noted that the Tynemouth Electron sailed swiftly, but could get no closer to the wind than 60 degrees. Furthermore, the vibrations produced by the speed led the screws on Donald's self-steering gear to come loose, which led to the two men constantly having to fix them. Almost immediately upon Donald's departure on October 31st, he ran into issues. The boat sprung a leak, he lost some of the screws he'd repeatedly have to fix, and had no spares on board, meaning he had to cannibalize other parts of the boat to replace them. Then his generator broke down. Over the next few weeks, he made considerably less progress in the race than he'd intended, largely due to a lack of speed. He soon began fabricating his positions when making his radio reports, often being vague about his whereabouts. Though he was meant to be in the Southern Ocean, he reportedly moved into the Atlantic Ocean and stopped in South America to make repairs to his boat, a violation of the event rules. By December, many believed he would be the winner of the race due to his false reports, and the fact that many contestants had already dropped out. 2 months passed, and one of the other contestants dropped out, while another became the first to complete the race. This led Donald and another contestant, Nigel Tetley, both in the running for second place, at least according to Donald's reports. In reality, he was nowhere near Nigel, who was far ahead of him. Still, Nigel was spurred on by his desire to win second place, and he pushed his frail boat further and further before eventually he had to abandon ship on May 30th, 1969. There is some speculation here that Donald was now feeling the weight of the pressure of the race. If he looked to have completed the fastest circumnavigation, it would lead his logbooks to be thoroughly examined by experienced sailors, who would undoubtedly see through his false reports. He was last heard from on June 29th, while his last logbook was dated July 1st. His boat, the Tynemouth Electron, was found empty on July 10th. It is assumed that sometime around July 1st, Donald Crowhurst fell or stepped overboard and drowned. The boat itself did not indicate as to what may have happened to him. It showed no signs of accident or a rogue wave that could have swept him overboard. Many, including Donald's biographers, have concluded that Donald took his own life after suffering some sort of mental breakdown brought on by the stress of the race. They theorized that he believed he had two options: to complete the race as a fraud and live with the guilt for the rest of his life, or lose his house and face financial ruin and public humiliation if he admitted to his lies. Biographers Nicholas Tomalin and Ron Hall suggested that Donald spiraled into classical paranoia, a psychotic disorder in which deluded ideas are built into a complex, intricate structure. The writings in the last few weeks of his log entries were noted to have become increasingly erratic and irrational. Meanwhile, a clinical psychologist named Jeff Powter speculated that Donald suffered from undiagnosed bipolar disorder, which may have contributed to the stark mood swings noted in his later logbook entries, which showed him switching between manic and depressed episodes. On June 24th, Donald began writing in a new logbook he titled Philosophy. Inside it was a 25,000-word manifesto which described how all of mankind could achieve an advanced evolutionary state he called a second-generation cosmic being. The logbook contained incoherent ramblings throughout, but he wrote that life was a game overseen by cosmic beings, God and the devil, who set the rules by which the game was played. However, he wrote, man could eventually become a second-generation cosmic being himself, so he could set the rules of the game personally. His final entries, dated July 1st, include writings such as 10:23:40, cannot see any purpose in game. 10:29, now is revealed the true nature and purpose and power of the game offense. I am what I am, and I see the nature of my offense. It is finished, it is finished, it is the mercy. Many who read these logs believe that Donald had come to peace with himself and his situation by deciding to take his own life. While his body has never been found, this is the most commonly held theory in the case. Still, it cannot be discounted that Donald faked his death or met with an accident. Both theories have also been suggested over the years. Simon Crowhurst, one of Donald's sons, believed that part of the appeal of his father's story, which has since inspired plays, films, books, and even an opera, lies in the fact that he was one lone man going out into the world against the brutal elements of the sea, accompanied by nothing but a radio and a few logbooks. It is a story that people remember, and that's a consolation. It's a story that tells you something about what it means to be human. Olive Walker. At about 6:45 p.m. on the evening of May 15th, 1970, 18-year-old Olive Walker left her home on Leslie Street in the city of Rotorua, New Zealand. She planned to visit her sister so that she could babysit her children for her that night, and although she was meant to head to Malfroy Road, she was last seen at what was then the Odeon Theatre on Pukaki Street at 7:50 p.m. Olive's sister, Mary, waited for her younger sibling to turn up, but she never did. It wasn't until the following morning that she caught wind that a body had been found. At 11:30 the previous night, a group of teenagers had discovered Olive's body. She had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and dumped at the side of the road. The estimated time of the murder was around 9 p.m., and investigators believe that the 18-year-old was picked up by someone who attacked her before leaving her body by the highway. Olive's horrific murder, however, has never been solved, though there have been several suspects over the years, with police looking at as many as 100 potential suspects. In 2007, the police confirmed that one such suspect was a sex offender who was currently behind bars. His name came up in the investigation after detectives worked with Australian psychic Dan Webber to produce an e-fit of the suspect, and upon looking into his background and criminal history, they deemed it possible that the man had been responsible for Olive's rape and murder. Though investigators planned to try and link the suspect to the case via DNA, they noted that a lack of time and resources was hindering the case. A more recent article from the New Zealand Herald in 2018 noted that this suspect was now out of jail and still residing in the Rotorua area. Authorities stated, "There is no immediate plan to interview him without substantial information to put to him." To this day, it is still unknown who this man is and if he is responsible for the crime. And though in 2018 investigators were looking for forensic evidence to move the case forward, it has remained at a standstill. There has been no progress in Olive's case in recent years, and unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be much information about the initial investigation online. Olive was described as a shy girl with few friends and was just one of 11 siblings. Her father died in 1982 at the age of 76. Her older sister, Mary, blamed his death on Olive's murder, noting that he was never the same after she was killed. She stated, "The pressure and stress, that killed him." Mary added that she's not entirely sure she wants to know what happened the night that her sister was killed, due to how much it would hurt to rake it all up again. She told the New Zealand Herald in 2005, "It doesn't make me feel good that no one has been caught for it, but if it happens, it happens. I'm sure everyone would like to see justice done, but it's been 35 years. Olive's case is still unsolved. If you have information about her murder, you can contact Crime Stoppers at 0800 555 111 or call the Rotorua Police Station on 07 348 0099. Cheyenne Vasquez. On April 8, 2002, the body of 14-year-old Cheyenne Vasquez was discovered partially submerged in a draining pond in Boise, Idaho. She had gone missing in January that year. Cheyenne was last seen alive on January 16th at around 9 p.m. when she was spotted at a convenience store off the corner of Maple Grove and Overland Roads in Boise. Reportedly, a man named Ramiro Granado had dropped her off there at this time, leaving her to make her own way home. According to news articles, Cheyenne had been babysitting for Granado, a family friend in his 30s, since she was 13, but the situation was not ideal for her, as Granado reportedly plied Cheyenne with alcohol and behaved inappropriately towards her. Despite Cheyenne's failure to return home on the night of January 16th, she was not reported missing until 3 weeks later in early February. Her grandmother claimed she didn't report the 14-year-old's disappearance because she believed she was either staying with a friend or had gone to see her mother, who was residing in the city of Nampa, Idaho at the time. When she was finally listed as missing, however, it seemed that law enforcement was uninterested in chasing down leads. She was dismissed as a runaway, and the investigation into her disappearance was virtually non-existent. On April 8th, employees of a gardening company working at Eagle Business Park, in the area where she was last seen, discovered Cheyenne's body. She was identified a few days after she was found. Though she'd been there since January, her body hadn't been noticed due to overgrowth, as the area was not maintained during the winter. She was wearing only a bra and a pair of unzipped jeans that had been pulled down around her hips. Though many reports note that the cause of death couldn't be found due to the state of the body, Cheyenne was described as being swollen and bruised around her mouth and one eye, leading investigators to treat her death as suspicious, and she had a blood alcohol level of 0.11. At the scene, another item of clothing was recovered, a sweatshirt that was soon determined to belong to Ramiro Granado. Shortly afterwards, he became investigators' #1 suspect. In 2003, Granado admitted that he'd raped Cheyenne earlier on the day she went missing, when authorities found DNA evidence in his truck. He also confessed to giving her alcohol. However, he denied being involved with the murder. He was charged and convicted of lewd conduct with a minor, and at his sentencing, the judge ruled that he'd be required to serve at least 8 years before he'd be eligible for parole. They also noted that Granado had taken advantage of Cheyenne and her unstable home life, using the sadness of her life to foster an inappropriate relationship with her. His defense attorney, meanwhile, argued that Granado, a father of 5, was simply a family man who'd got himself into a giant pickle. Granado made numerous attempts to lessen his sentence but was never successful. In 2014, he was denied parole once more, and it was ruled that he would no longer have the right to an automatic appeal for parole every 2 years. 19 relatives and friends sent letters to the parole board before a decision was reached, each and every one detailing how Cheyenne was vulnerable, and Granado preyed on that vulnerability. 9 members of her family attended the hearing. Her aunt, Rachel, stated, "We miss her every day. We have so many questions, yet so little answers." Cheyenne's case is still unsolved. If you have any information about her case, you can call Crime Stoppers at 208-343-2677. Kelly Cook. On April 22nd, 1981, at around 8:20 a.m., 15-year-old Kelly Cook was getting organized for school when her morning rituals were interrupted by a phone call. Kelly, a resident of Standard, Alberta, Canada, was the oldest of 3 children, a popular and academically skilled student, and well known in the local area as a reliable babysitter. So when the caller that morning offered her a babysitting job, she didn't immediately say no. The problem with the phone call was that the man on the other end of the line was not someone Kelly had babysat for before, nor had she ever met him. Bill Christensen, as he called himself, claimed that he needed her to babysit for him between 8:30 and midnight that night. He noted that he'd received her number from another babysitter who declined the job because she was busy, and he'd asked if she could recommend some other sitters. Understandably, Kelly's family were concerned about the job and advised her to not immediately take it, as they had no idea who Bill Christensen was. Her mother suggested that she ask around at school to see if anyone else knew this man or had babysat for him before. If people knew him, she could accept the job, but if not, she would decline. Kelly agreed to this idea and set off to school with the plan in mind. However, it wasn't long before another issue arose. Christensen was a fairly common surname in Standard, and it led the 15-year-old to be given mixed information. Some people had heard of him and heard nothing bad, but still, it was hard to say whether or not this man was the same man. Despite the uncertainty of the situation, Kelly appeared to be reassured by her peers' responses, and so she let her mother know that people at school knew him. Her mother subsequently allowed her to accept the job. That night, at 11:30 p.m., a car pulled up outside Kelly's home. She said goodbye to her parents and her siblings before leaving the property and climbing into the passenger side of the vehicle. She promised her mother she would call as soon as she made it safely to Bill's house, but that call never came. Hours passed, and Kelly's parents grew more and more concerned. At 12:30 a.m., they contacted the police to explain the situation and report their child missing. Law enforcement soon began extensively searching for Kelly. Vehicles were stopped, the occupants' questions, woods, ditches, barns, and fields were all combed through, and officers were dispatched to check out Kelly's regular haunts, but there was no trace of the 15-year-old. Days gave way to weeks, and weeks unfolded into months. Nobody saw Kelly. Nobody heard from her. Nobody knew if she was alive or dead. It wasn't until June 28th, just over 2 months later, that the Cook family and the town of Standard received an answer. That day, a group of teenagers were out exploring the countryside when, while near Chin Lake, a reservoir around 2.5 hours from Kelly's home, they discovered a body on the shoreline. A girl was lying face down, fully clothed, bound by ropes, and weighed down by cinder blocks. Investigators used dentals to identify her due to the body being badly decomposed. This was 15-year-old Kelly Cook, missing since April 22nd. Reports indicated there was no sexual assault and that she had died of asphyxiation. Shortly after Kelly's body turned up, law enforcement determined that this murder had been planned for several months before it came to fruition. It was not a spur-of-the-moment crime and had been carefully planned. The only suspect in the case was Bill Christensen, the man who called Kelly and picked her up on the night of her disappearance. He is described by Kelly's family as being around 30 to 45 years old, weighing 180 pounds, and standing at around 5'10". He had weathered, tanned skin, short dark hair, a nose with a large bridge, and a round face. The family added that he looked unattractive. Notably, when this description was released of Kelly's killer, a local petrol station owner contacted investigators to let them know that someone of a similar appearance had been in his store the day of Kelly's disappearance and had asked to use his phone. The man, according to the owner, was around 5'9", with black curly hair and tan skin. He reportedly had an unpleasant attitude and dialed a local number. The petrol station owner listened in on the call, which pertained to babysitting. However, this man was never identified and questioned. It's still unclear if he is the same man who picked up Kelly on the night of her disappearance. Eerily still, a report claims that shortly after Kelly's death, when her body was at a funeral home in Calgary on July 2nd, an unidentified man demanded to see her body, claiming to know the family. He was denied, however, and eventually left. Detectives noted that the whereabouts of Kelly's body at the time were not common knowledge. It's unclear how he knew she was there. It's also unknown who this man was, but law enforcement believes that he may have been Kelly's killer. Throughout the investigation, over 2,000 possible suspects were looked into by the police, and although the case remains active, there are still no answers for Kelly's family. Her younger sister, Marnie, told Global News, "It's just life now. It's just what we've had to learn to live with. There's no acceptance in it. There's no closure, if you want to use that word." She added that after so long of not knowing, the idea of finally having answers is just as terrifying as never having them at all. If it all changed tomorrow and we had those answers, I don't know if any of us are prepared for that. Justice makes that individual accountable, but it doesn't bring her home. It doesn't change it. Chillingly, police believe that over the years, they have likely encountered and spoken with Kelly's killer at least once, but they are no closer to identifying him today than they were in 1981. A $100,000 reward is being offered by the village of Standard for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Kelly's killer. If you have information about Kelly's case, you can contact the Serious Crimes Branch South Airdrie at 403-420-4900, or alternatively, you can call Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. Diane and Mark Yoli. 7-year-old Diane Moon Yoli and her half-brother, 2-year-old Mark Eugene Yoli, were last seen at around 3:15 on the afternoon of September 13th, 1962. The two children were on their way to the playground at Camp Lejeune, a military base in North Carolina where their father was stationed. Given that this occurred in the early 1960s, the parents of Mark and Diane were not immediately alarmed when they didn't come home. They were known to be adventurous children who often wandered off. One time they were even found sleeping beneath a tree, but as the day turned into night and the sky grew dark, their parents grew concerned. From their home in the 700 block of Butler Drive, they set off, looking for their children and alerting the base and authorities to the disappearance. A massive search was soon launched, with over 1,000 Marines joining in with the efforts. Over the next few days, the area of Camp Lejeune was extensively combed through, but no evidence of the children was found. It seemed as if they had disappeared into thin air. Police originally theorized that the pair had fallen into the swamp bordering the base, but no sign of the children was recovered. For decades, the case lay dormant. It wasn't until 1992 that a break came when a woman named Marjorie Hunt contacted Onslow County Sheriff Ed Brown and told him that she knew what had become of the children. Ed Brown had grown up in the area. He was a teenager in high school when Mark and Diane disappeared. He recalled that back then, he had a girlfriend who lived next door to a couple named Henry and Marjorie Hunt. The pair were the subject of much gossip. They lived off base, about 13 miles from the playground where Mark and Diane vanished. Speaking with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Ed remembered, "My girlfriend's family would always talk about the suspicious things they would see going over on the Hunt's property. At the time, my girlfriend's family had a German Shepherd, and whenever the dog would get out of the yard, he would immediately run over to the Hunt's property and start sniffing around areas of their crawl space." Marjorie Hunt unfortunately died before she could be questioned by law enforcement, but on her deathbed, she had told her daughter what her ex-husband Henry had told her at the time. Henry, who died 1 year earlier at the age of 85, was a convicted child molester and is the only suspect in the case. Marjorie claimed that at the time of the children's disappearance, he had told her he was responsible for the vanishing and their subsequent deaths. Hunt's story goes something like this. On the day of the disappearance, he collected the children from the park and took them fishing on his boat. While out on the water, 2-year-old Mark toppled over and fell in, subsequently drowning. Meanwhile, panicked, Hunt killed Diane and recovered Mark's body. He then navigated to a rock quarry in Maysville, North Carolina, where he disposed of the bodies. Due to his previous experiences with the Hunt family, namely his former girlfriend's dog's obsession with their home's crawl space, and the numerous rumors floating around town about the couple, Sheriff Ed Brown was convinced that instead of leaving the bodies in the quarry, Henry Hunt had brought the corpses home and buried them on his property. It wasn't until some years later, however, in 2011, that any progress was made on this front. A developer eventually purchased the land and was informed of the story by Ed, who asked him to remain vigilant in case he came across any evidence during redevelopment. The developer did as Ed asked. While demolishing the home, the team working on the property discovered a shovel, jawbone, 2 smaller bones, and a child-sized pink vinyl belt underneath the floorboards. While the bones were later found to be animal rather than human, the owner of the pink belt has never been established. All this time later, Brown continues to suspect that Hunt was responsible for the disappearances of Diane and Mark, noting, "You don't leave 2 children that can talk and walk and run and play with a bad memory in their mind that they could go tell someone about later." Still, despite the suspicions and the deathbed confession, the case remains unsolved, and Mark and Diane have never been located. Diane and Mark were last seen on their way to the playground at Camp Lejeune, a military base in North Carolina, at around 3:15 on the afternoon of September 13th, 1962. Diane was 7 years old at the time, and is described as a white female with blonde hair and blue eyes. She was 3'11" and weighed 79 pounds at the time of her disappearance. She was last seen wearing a white or printed blouse with white sleeves and a pair of shorts. If she is still alive, she will be 68. Her half-brother, Mark, was 2 at the time, and is described as a white male with dark brown hair and weighed 30 pounds when he vanished. On the day he disappeared, he was wearing a t-shirt and brown shorts. He will be 63 if he is still alive. If you have any information about the disappearance of the siblings, you can contact the Onslow County Sheriff's Office at 1-910-455-3113, or alternatively, you can call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678. Sarah Avon. 6-year-old Sarah Elizabeth Avon was last seen with her younger sister on the corner of Richard Street in Joliet, Illinois on July 21, 1981. The 2 girls met with friends there, but after Sarah argued with another child, she walked away from the group and crossed over to the other side of the street. Not long afterwards, she vanished from view and has never been seen again. At 9 o'clock that evening, her family reported her missing. Her parents later noted that they'd last seen her around 8:20 p.m. Old newspaper reports from the time note that the search for Sarah lasted into the following day, involving volunteers, neighbors, and police officers, while volunteer firefighters manned 5 boats and dragged a quarry near Richard Street and Interstate 80. Sarah's mother recalled that her daughter knows a lot of people in this area that I don't, adding that she regularly went to church, took swimming lessons, played football, and even practiced ballet. She stated, "I've been racking my brain trying to remember who she might trust. She is very perceptive of people." But despite the efforts of police, locals, and Sarah's family, no trace of the 6-year-old was ever found. For over a decade, the case lay dormant. Then, in January 1993, a former neighbor of the Avon family, Ernest Wilson Sr., died in Arkansas. Shortly afterwards, his nephew, Robert TJ, approached the police with information. He claimed that his uncle had made a deathbed revelation about Sarah's disappearance. Though Wilson had been unable to speak, he drew a triangular shape on a piece of paper before adding a circle inside it. Wilson's family members took this triangle to represent the similarly shaped lot he had lived on back in 1981, and theorized that the circle was the spot where Sarah's body was buried. Robert went on to explain that his cousin, Wilson's son, had implicated himself and another boy in Sarah's death. In 1981, the cousin was 15 years old and described as mentally disturbed. He admitted that he had molested the 6-year-old and she was killed inside their home. Robert told the Tribune in May 1993 he said he molested Sarah but was upstairs when she was murdered. There was no doubt in my mind at that time that he had done it because everything fit. The only question was, where was the body? Robert suspected that his uncle had covered up the incident by burying Sarah's body on their property. A further witness corroborated this idea by stating that in 1981 they had seen Wilson digging a hole in his garden. The hole was deep up to Wilson's chest, and when asked why he was digging, Wilson claimed that he was going to move some of his flowers around. Notably, this same witness saw something else odd sometime later when Wilson, using his bulldozer, began moving mounds of dirt near Hickory Creek and knocking down trees. He later moved his family's pool down there. After all this information was revealed to the police, they began digging up the empty lot on Miller Avenue that had belonged to Wilson in 1981. After a few days of extensive searches, however, they recovered no evidence and the event was called off. The witness who had seen Wilson digging a hole in his garden at the time of the disappearance told investigators that he believed they weren't digging deep enough, although they reportedly paid no mind to his complaints. One official did, however, later agree that law enforcement had not searched a big enough area of the property, meaning the possibility that Sarah's remains are still there cannot be ruled out. One other person of interest in the case is an individual named William Billy Redden. 10 years before the disappearance, he was convicted of aggravated battery against a 19-month-old child and served over 3 years behind bars before being released in 1975. In 1981, he was residing in the 200 block of Reichman Street with his mother, just minutes away from Sarah's home. Furthermore, he was her father's cousin. He knew Sarah and regularly visited her house. Redden died in 2010, and while his former home was searched and excavated in 2019, 9 years after his death, no evidence of Sarah was recovered. Still, rumors of Redden's involvement persist even today. Sarah's old babysitter recalled, "Billy Redden was creepy, really scary. Everyone was kind of thinking it was Billy." She also remembered that one of her own children would later become terrified of delivering newspapers or collecting payments from Redden. Another local woman described him as a creep, noting that when she did her paper round as a child, he would say inappropriate things to me, and I was scared to death of him. Redden was questioned at the time of Sarah's disappearance, and a cursory search of his home was carried out, but nothing connecting him to the case was found. Though no evidence ever linked Redden to Sarah's disappearance, locals remain convinced he is the culprit, with Sarah's former babysitter stating, "We're pretty certain it was Billy. The kids were all uncomfortable with him. Anybody that knew them pretty much thought it was Billy." Still, the case remains unsolved. Sarah Elizabeth Avon was just 6 when she vanished from Richard Street in Joliet, Illinois, on July 21, 1981. She is described as a white female with blonde hair and brown eyes, and at the time of her disappearance, she was 4 feet tall and weighed 75 pounds. When she was last seen, she was wearing a Joliet District football t-shirt, blue joggers with red and white stripes, and blue trainers with a white stripe. If she is still alive, she will be 48 years old. If you have any information about Sarah's case, you can contact Will County Sheriff's Office at 1-815-727-8574. Gina Brooks. 13-year-old Gina Dawn Brooks was last seen on August 5, 1989, in Fredericktown, Missouri. That evening, at around 10 o'clock, after watching her brother play in a baseball game, she headed back home along Marshall Street. Upon arriving, she said goodnight to her mother, who was going to bed. Gina then decided she wanted to go out for a cycle and told her brother as much. She left the family home again at around 10:30 p.m. and rode through the town. Witnesses would later report that she was spotted near First Street Baptist Church, where the driver of an old, beat-up station wagon, described as being either light gray, green, or blue in color and bearing Missouri license plates, attempted to speak with her. Gina, however, kept on riding her bike. She turned the corner onto High Street, where she stopped to speak with her boyfriend. Before long, though, the vehicle appeared again. Shortly afterwards, there was a scream, overheard by several witnesses, including her boyfriend, and the car hastily drove off. Gina was gone, taken off the street by an unidentified perpetrator. All that was left was her bike, abandoned on the pavement. She was just 5 blocks from home. Her parents reported her missing at around 2 a.m. when her mother awoke and found Gina missing from her bed. Before long, Lieutenant Keith Despain, who'd found a bicycle not far from First Street Baptist Church, put the pieces together. The bike belonged to the now missing 13-year-old. By the time the morning came, law enforcement was combing through the town. City, country, state, and federal officials worked together to try and find any evidence of the young girl. Flyers were distributed, posters were blue-tacked up in shops, and yellow ribbons were draped across trees. Locals were shocked by the incident, and volunteers helped search for clues, though they failed to find anything of use. Years passed before investigators discovered the name Nathan Danny Williams. Williams had been an informant on a case in 1975, where he claimed to know who had murdered Laura Dinwiddie, who had been brutally stabbed in her apartment. He had been 14 at the time and pointed the finger at one of his friends. However, by 1989, Williams had racked up quite the criminal history, having been convicted for the rape of a 13-year-old girl and later the rape of a 10-year-old. Investigators who looked further into Williams were able to tie him to evidence from the Laura Dinwiddie case, as well as several other unsolved crimes. Tracing Williams' movements, detectives found that the assault of the 10-year-old girl had occurred just 1 month after the disappearance of Gina Brooks. More interestingly, they discovered that Williams' brother had a close friend who lived near Gina and Williams and was known to frequent the area. He was eventually identified by a witness as the man in the back of the station wagon with Gina on the night she went missing. Witnesses would also go on to identify Bryant Squires as the driver of the vehicle. He reportedly made a deathbed confession to 2 nurses, implicating himself and Williams in Gina's abduction and murder, along with several other crimes. Squires was Williams's best friend and died of cancer in 1996. According to his confession, Williams held Gina in the back seat and took her life. A third person was also reportedly involved with Gina's disappearance, a man named Timothy Bellew, who would later be charged with second-degree murder after admitting he'd seen Williams kill the 13-year-old. However, Bellew's stories were prone to change, and his shifting details led to inconsistent stories. As a result, the murder charges were dropped, and he was charged instead with lying to the FBI when he failed to turn up Gina's remains, repeatedly giving them locations and directions, none of which panned out. At one point, he claimed the body was in an abandoned meat freezer on his father's 96-acre property, but despite numerous searches over the years, no remains have ever been recovered. Bellew pled guilty to this charge and was given 30 months in prison. In 1990, he was convicted of sexually assaulting a 7-year-old girl and given 5 years behind bars. As of 2022, he was still residing in Fredericktown, but authorities have labeled him as unstable and not reliable. In 1998, 9 years after Gina went missing, Williams was charged with her murder. Hope for closure and justice was short-lived, though. In 2003, the charge was dropped for fear of the possibility of double jeopardy. The prosecuting attorney at the time, Dwight Robbins, stated, "I am of the firm opinion that the state should not proceed to trial and risk the possibility of acquittal, thereby losing any chance of retrying the case, should further evidence become available. The offence alleged is so egregious and the consequences of conviction so great that the prosecution should proceed only when the evidence is sufficient to ensure the likelihood of conviction. Authorities believe Williams won't confess, as a first-degree murder charge could mean he'd face the death penalty. They believe he is the man who killed Gina after abducting her in 1989, but there is speculation that he won't admit to his part in the crime without some kind of plea deal. Investigators have also named Williams as a suspect in the disappearance of 12-year-old Tammy Rose Surdam, who was last seen at a youth shelter in St. Charles, Missouri, on August 1st, 1979. They suspect he is connected to further crimes. He remains in prison and will not be eligible for parole until 2039. The case is still unsolved. Gina Dawn Brooks was last seen on August 5th, 1989, in Fredericktown, Missouri, when she was approached by a beat-up-looking station wagon with Missouri license plates. The vehicle was possibly light gray, green, or blue in color. Gina was 13 at the time of her disappearance and is described as a white female with blonde hair and green eyes. She has several white scars on the shin of her left leg. At the time of her disappearance, she was 5 foot tall and weighed 108 pounds. She was wearing a blue striped top, white shorts, and trainers. If she is still alive, she will be 48 years old. If you have any information about Gina's case, you can contact the Madison County Sheriff's Office at 573-783-2234 or call Crime Stoppers anonymously at 866-371-8477. Vancito Gums. In November of 2020, the Department of Justice announced that a former Georgia police officer named Vancito Gums was convicted on gang-related charges. Those who knew Gums were shocked. 28-year-old Gums was working as a DeKalb County police officer when it emerged he had claimed to be a hitman for the Gangster Disciples, a U.S. gang with roots in Chicago, Illinois. Investigators alleged that he had relayed sensitive law information to gang members and even provided weapons to them. The Gangster Disciples criminal group dates back to the 1970s and is described by law enforcement as being highly structured. It reportedly follows a leadership hierarchy called the positions of authority. Furthermore, the gang follows a set of rules, with the most important being silence and secrecy. It disallows its members from cooperating with law enforcement, and its rules are taken so seriously that anyone who disobeys can be punished by death. Between 2011 and 2014, the group was responsible for 24 shootings and 12 murders. Gums was barely out of high school when he signed up to join the military, planning to help support his pregnant girlfriend by serving in the Middle East. He was just 20 when he was sent overseas, where he brought supplies to troops on the front lines. According to his mother, Janelle, Gums engaged in firefights and did things he didn't want to do, adding that these things would haunt him when he came home. In 2013, back home in the US, he joined the DeKalb County Police Department, though he was known to be struggling greatly with his mental health. His mother claimed that before his arrest, he wasn't eating or sleeping and had turned to drink to help him manage his mental anguish. Though his loved ones encouraged him to reach out for help, by the time he scheduled an appointment with the Department of Veterans Affairs, it was too late. He was arrested the day before his meeting. While investigating Gums, prosecutors concluded that the 28-year-old had joined or remained as part of the gang, while knowing and agreeing that the gang engaged in murder. Furthermore, in 2015, he sent a text message that read, "I am a GD hitman." During this time, Gums was being monitored by the FBI, which had suspicions that he was involved with the Gangster Disciples, and while investigators believed that GD stood for the gang name, as it was commonly abbreviated, Gums argued that GD meant goddamn, and told his attorney this. He also added that he was referring to his time in the military. His lawyer concluded that he was likely trying to impress the woman who he'd sent the message to. In 2019, Gums was accused of assaulting a man while on duty back in 2015. He reportedly mistook the man for a rival gang member, the victim claimed. The victim's attorney stated, "At the time he assaulted my client, he was telling my client he was a gangster disciple. All I know is he assaulted my client, broke his jaw, and caused about $77,000 in medical bills, all while he's handcuffed." The FBI also noted that they recorded phone conversations Gumbs had with the Georgia Gangster Disciples chief enforcer, a man named Kevin Clayton, whom he had befriended shortly after joining the force. The DOJ added, on later calls, the chief enforcer noted that he had Gangster Disciples police officers at his disposal. Some of the information Gumbs passed to Clayton included information about a type of crime police were investigating at one point, and advice that he should avoid a specific bar that the police officers intended on raiding. Gumbs was also accused of having cocaine in his police patrol car, and he resigned from his position following this complaint. Gumbs was sentenced to 15 years in prison for racketeering conspiracy involving murder. He will subsequently face 5 years of supervised release. U.S. Attorney Byung Pak said of this case, "His brazen disregard for his sworn duty as a police officer, betrayal of the police's trust, and disregard for human life warrants the significant sentence he received in this case." Jack Hudson. In the city of Yuma, Arizona, on July 4th, 1995, dispatchers were surprised to receive a call from Yuma Police Lieutenant Dan Elkins. In a frenzied voice, the police officer could be heard saying, "Hurry up, hurry, he's shooting guns, he's firing rounds, hurry up." But just moments later, Dan Elkins would be shot dead. The man he'd been referring to on the phone was the Yuma County Sheriff's deputy, Jack Hudson. At the time, Jack Hudson, Dan Elkins, and Mike Crow, a Department of Public Safety sergeant, were all parts of a narcotics task force and had been working undercover. The force consisted of 22 members from local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies and was designed to investigate drug activity in the Yuma area. Reportedly, on the days leading up to the July 4th shooting, the officers had noticed that key evidence was missing from their office, so they decided to install a video camera to attempt to capture whoever was carrying out the thefts. Then, on July 4th, Dan Elkins, Mike Crow, and evidence custodian Jim Earhart headed to the task force office to find they'd captured one of their own, Hudson, on the installed CCTV. Furthermore, they found that the safes had been broken into and offices had been ransacked. The trio, as they went to leave the building, then ran into Jack Hudson, who, without warning, began firing a 9mm weapon. The other 3 officers were not armed, and though they tried to get help, it didn't arrive on time. Mike and Dan died at the scene. Earhart managed to escape when Hudson's gun jammed. In reports, Hudson is described as being mentally unwell, with Dan Elkins claiming on his call to emergency services that his colleague had gone 918, a Yuma PD radio code meaning mentally unstable, but it's unclear what his exact motive was. 37-year-old Hudson was arrested outside of the building and held in lieu of $15.5 million bail. He had attempted to flee the scene, but was arrested swiftly. 3 guns and a set of evidence room keys were discovered in Hudson's vehicle, while a further 40 guns were found in his home, 25 of which had been lifted from the task force evidence room. Other items seized from the deputy included drug paraphernalia, $2,700 in cash, illegal substances, radios, binoculars, multiple phones, cassette tapes, and a U.S. Customs badge. Hudson was convicted of murder in 1997 and sentenced to life behind bars. Reportedly, for years after the shooting, he claimed he couldn't remember anything he'd done as he was high on drugs at the time. Hudson died of natural causes in October 2017, aged 59, while still in prison. Tom Coleman. In 1999, Tom Coleman was awarded the Texas Department of Public Safety's Outstanding Lawman of the Year. Between January 1998 and July 1999, in a small Texan town named Tulia, Coleman had been operating undercover as part of a drugs task force, and during his time, he arrested 46 people who would later be convicted on felony drug charges. Notably, 39 of these victims were black. All of them pled guilty and received sentences of up to 90 years. The first to go to trial was a man named Joe Moore. Joe was touted as Tulia's kingpin, but lived in a shack and drove an ancient sedan that was barely held together. Joe, who'd insisted that he'd never sold cocaine to Coleman, maintained his innocence throughout the trial. Coleman would later become well known for his distinct lack of evidence. He never wore a wire and never recorded his exchanges with the supposed drug dealers. He didn't even have a notebook in which to record interactions. Instead, he scribbled names and dates on his leg. More interestingly still, those who'd been arrested by Coleman had no drugs, drug paraphernalia, weapons, or unusual amounts of money in their homes when searched. In all cases, the state had no physical or corroborating evidence. It was essentially Coleman's word against the defendants. Joe Moore was accused of delivering cocaine to Coleman within 1,000 feet of a school, no less. While he'd been convicted of 2 felonies in his youth, his criminal record was otherwise minimal. He believed that the justice system would see him right and continued to protest his innocence throughout the ordeal. Unfortunately, a mostly white jury found Joe guilty. He was sentenced to 99 years behind bars. Locals and the media celebrated the conviction. Coleman, they believed, was taking out the garbage and ridding the streets of so-called scumbags. He was seen as a local hero. Month after month, many Tulia residents watched in relief as one alleged criminal after another was put away. Even first-time offenders, like 22-year-old Freddie Brookins, weren't let off lightly. Freddie was charged with 1 count of delivery and given 27 years behind bars, despite, like Joe Moore, there being no evidence, only Coleman's word. But Coleman was far from a perfect witness. He reportedly got dates and times wrong frequently, and eventually he was seen as suspicious when his victims were able to produce solid alibis proving that they were nowhere near Coleman when he said they were. One man was at work. Another woman, accused of dealing cocaine, was found to be in Oklahoma on the day of her interaction with the undercover cop. The prosecution, however, tried to maintain credibility for themselves and for Coleman by subtly dropping cases that were causing them issues. Some locals began to see through Coleman. They found him dubious, but they needed proof. A rancher named Gary Gardner and Reverend Alan Bean decided that they would be the ones to search for answers. They couldn't fathom how a town of 5,000 people contained 46 drug dealers. Who were they selling to? Before long, outsiders, journalists, and organizations such as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People began to take note of the inconsistencies in Coleman's investigations. A criminal attorney named Jeff Blackburn also turned his attention to the strange case and soon discovered that Coleman was not the lone Texas Ranger fighting the bad guys that he'd painted himself out to be. It was soon revealed that Coleman was a racist, often dropping slurs in front of colleagues, although he insisted that, despite the large number of black Americans he'd arrested, race had nothing to do with it. It also came to light that Coleman, when he became employed by Swisher County as a deputy, was under indictment for stealing $6,700 from Cochran County merchants, where he'd previously been employed as a sheriff. He was also fired in Ellis County after he was accused of sexual harassment. Lawyer Jeff Blackburn also filed appeals on behalf of convicted Tulia residents, adding to the disintegration of Coleman's reputation. The deputy was finally indicted on perjury charges and was also set to face a trial of his own. 35 of the 38 victims sent to prison were pardoned by the governor in 2003, and $5.9 million was doled out as part of a settlement. Joe Moore was paid over $250,000 for his ordeal. He eventually purchased a pig farm with the help of a retired preacher and a former real estate agent, before dying of a heart attack in 2008. Meanwhile, Tom Coleman was put on trial for perjury. He was found guilty and received 10 years of probation, but no jail time. One article notes that he still stands by his stories, claiming, quote, "They were pissed off at me because all the blacks went to jail, and I was the cause of all this misery. Well, I wouldn't have been the cause of all this misery if they hadn't sold me dope. I'm not an angel, I'll own up to anything I didn't do right, but I'll sure as hell not own up to anything I didn't do.
Patrick McDermott. Patrick Kim McDermott was born in Seoul, South Korea in September 1956. He was quickly put up for adoption following his birth and taken in by an American family when he was just 2 years old. As an adult, Patrick began working as a cameraman. In 1992, he married Yvette Nipa, an actress known for her roles in 80s and 90s TV shows such as RoboCop and 21 Jump Street. However, the union was short-lived. In 1994, the pair began proceedings for divorce. Later, following his disappearance, many of the issues surrounding their divorce, Patrick's financial status, and his issues as a father came to light. At the time of the couple's 1994 divorce, the father of one owed $800 a month in child support, and in April 2005, he was ordered to make all outstanding payments. Furthermore, in 2000, he filed for bankruptcy while owing around $31,000 to creditors. It was also noted that in 2002, Yvette and Patrick had fought over visitation rights, with Yvette stating in a petition that her ex-husband had a lack of parenting skills, often encouraging their son to play hooky, adding that he also had issues controlling his temper. Shortly after his divorce, Patrick began dating 70s pop star and Grease actress Olivia Newton-John. Their relationship is largely described as being on and off, and continued for around 9 years until Patrick disappeared in the summer of 2005. On June 30th, Patrick vanished from a fishing charter boat near San Pedro, Los Angeles. The boat was named Freedom and had left the marina for a 22-hour overnight fishing trip. Patrick often participated in overnight fishing trips. He was one of 23 passengers and crew aboard the boat and had decided to take the trip alone. Reportedly, no head count was carried out when the passengers disembarked at the end of the trip, but staff found his belongings, including his car keys, passport, and wallet, left behind. Investigators would later discover his car, still near the marina, where it had been left the previous day. Though Patrick's belongings had been found on board, the staff did not consider the possibility that something had happened to the 48-year-old, instead believing the items had simply been forgotten about and left behind. They were subsequently placed with lost property. It wasn't until July 6, 2005, 1 week after the trip, that his family noticed his absence when he didn't turn up to a pre-arranged event, and even then, a further 5 days passed before he was reported missing. The disappearance of Patrick, best known until this point for his relationship with Olivia Newton-John, wasn't reported on by the media until around a month later. Though Patrick's disappearance was investigated, an inquiry by the Coast Guard Investigative Service was closed on September 15, 2006, just over 1 year after he vanished. The inquiry, quote, did not find any evidence of criminal action, suicide, accident, or hoax in the disappearance of McDermott. While a separate investigation was carried out by the US Coast Guard, it appeared to find nothing of note at the time of the case's closure in 2008. Both investigations simply concluded that Patrick had been lost at sea. In the years since Patrick went missing, there have been numerous rumors and theories as to what became of him. The case was featured on prominent true crime shows and news networks, including America's Most Wanted and Dateline NBC. Investigators from the latter, headed by private investigator Philip Klein, went to Mexico in search of Patrick, under the belief that he was hiding out there, having faked his death to get out of financial difficulties. They claimed that he owed around $8,000 to his ex-wife for child support, and even created a fake website which logged and mapped visitors' data. They hoped this website could be used to lure in and trap Patrick. They noted that there had been over 20 sightings of Patrick in Mexico and Central America at the time of their inquiry. Then, in April 2009, Klein and his team claimed that they had successfully located Patrick and that he was living in Mexico under the name Pat Kim in Puerto Vallarta. They added that they had been contacted by a representative of his and that they had deemed the representative to be credible. Notably, you may recognize the name Philip Klein from one of our other videos, 3 eerie missing 411 cases that will leave you scratching for answers, in which we featured the case of Dior Kunz Jr., a toddler who vanished from Idaho in 2015. Philip Klein was hired to work on Dior's case, but later left the investigation before being rehired. He has a poor reputation, with several accusations of harassment against him, and he has had several defamation lawsuits brought against him too. Patrick's ex-wife, Yvette, took issue with Klein's involvement in the case. In March 2012, she wrote to Jeff Bezos, who was still Amazon's CEO at the time, and asked him to stop promoting Klein's book, claiming that Klein was a, quote, well-known serial liar who was simply looking to be famous at the expense of an unfortunate tragedy in our lives. She added that while Klein repeatedly promised he could prove her ex-husband was alive, neither Yvette nor Patrick's family ever received such evidence. In 2016, Klein's claims were pushed again when he spoke exclusively with Woman's Day magazine, claiming that Patrick, who would have been 59 at the time, was living in Sayulita, an isolated Mexican village, and that he was probably now working in the yachting industry for a high-profile family down there. A year later, it was reported that Patrick was alive when a photo was submitted to an Australian magazine named New Idea. The photo showed a woman and a man, the latter of whom resembled Patrick McDermott. However, 3 months later, the photo was debunked by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, who discovered that the couple in the photograph had come forward and identified themselves. None of the reports from Philip Klein that Patrick is still alive have ever been substantiated by law enforcement. He is still considered a missing person. Holly Roth. Born Helen Marjorie Roth in 1916 in Chicago, Illinois, Holly Roth was raised in the US and Europe, alternating her time between New York City, New York, and London, England, due to her father's job. She attended various schools and also spent some time being taught by private tutors. Even though she was moved to and from the state often, she considered herself a New Yorker and would ultimately graduate from James Madison High School in the borough of Brooklyn. She went on to study at several universities before obtaining a Bachelor of Arts. For a short time, Holly worked as a fashion model, but soon gained employment as a writer and editor for newspapers and magazines. She eventually began writing her first book, The Content Assignment, which, in 1953, was serialized in condensed form under the title The Girl Who Vanished. Holly would go on to author several more books and short stories in the spy fiction and detective fiction genres, working under the pen names P.J. Merrill and K.G. Ballard, finding some success. One of her stories was nominated for an Edgar Award, but she is considered to be an underrated writer whose work was often overlooked during the 1950s. In 1960, aged 44, Holly married Joseph Franta, a 32-year-old man with a Swiss passport who was born and raised in Prague, in the Czech Republic. The pair had met in Geneva, Switzerland, when Joseph had been working with the International Labour Organization. Later that year, Joseph purchased a 49-foot ketch, a type of sailboat, named the Visa, which he paid $8,500 for. The Visa had been built in Norway in 1912 and weighed 25 tons. Joseph subsequently put the boat in his wife's name, and Holly spent around $20,000 on renovations. Holly's brother, Frank, who last saw his sister just before she tied the knot, noted that the newly wedded couple spent time living in Paris and Mallorca for several years, but spent the last year of her life living aboard the Visa. She wrote to her editor at the end of 1963, stating, "We keep trying to cross the ocean. One thing or another stops us, but we remain happy enough." In another letter, one written to her brother on March 30th, 1964, she claimed that while she wanted to return home to New York, her husband was having extreme difficulty entering the US as the CIA was blackballing him. Several months later, on October 8th, Holly and her husband left Gibraltar, planning to make the trip to the Canary Islands on the Visa. However, things grew difficult when 2 days later, the weather turned and they became caught in a storm. Then at around 4 a.m. on October 11th, Holly vanished. Joseph stated that the couple had been 20 miles north of Safi, a city in western Morocco, when a force suddenly shook the boat, throwing him against the wall below deck. At the time, Holly had been above deck. When he scrambled to check on her, he noticed a 45-foot-long, grey-coloured sailing ship moving away from the Visa. Joseph believed he saw someone in the water wearing a life jacket and called out, but received no answer. He subsequently steered the boat in the direction of the body and threw out a buoy, but to no avail. He then twice tied a line to himself and descended into the water to try and locate Holly, but he failed to find her. Back on board the boat, he fired flares and a gun to attract fishing boats he'd spotted earlier before making radio contact with Safi. No one immediately came to his or Holly's rescue. It wasn't until around noon that a fishing trawler arrived and the Visa was towed to the city. Several boats searched for Holly in the area where she is presumed to have fallen overboard, but no trace of her was found. A later report listed the 48-year-old as having died due to an accident, presumed lost at sea and drowned. The following month, a source at the US State Department noted that the investigation into Holly's disappearance was still open, though it was reported that Moroccan police had closed the case 2 days later, listing her death as accidental. Joseph stayed in Morocco for a short while afterwards, attempting to sell the Visa, which had sustained almost $6,000 worth of damage during the alleged collision with the other sailboat. It is unclear if Joseph ever managed to sell the Visa, or what became of him following Holly's disappearance. Holly's body has never been recovered. Sam Heslop. 41-year-old Sam Heslop was last seen at a restaurant on the island of St. John, one of the US Virgin Islands, with her boyfriend Ryan Bain, 44, on March 7th, 2021. The couple had met the previous year over Tinder, and together had taken up work on a 47-foot-long catamaran Bain owned, named the Siren Song. The catamaran was moored in a bay off the western coast of St. John and was available to be rented for private charters. Sam worked on the watercraft as a cook. Before this, she had been a flight attendant with the airline Flybe. On the evening of March 7th, Sam and Bain had dinner together. According to COVID-19 restrictions at the time, they should have left the restaurant by 10 p.m. and returned to the Siren Song, moored 200 feet from the shore in Cruz Bay. This meant that the two should have taken a dinghy from the shore to the watercraft. According to Bain, Sam was asleep by 10 p.m. and had vanished by 2:30, just 4.5 hours later. Upon discovering that she wasn't on board, Ryan took the dinghy out to the island to report her disappearance to the police, who, in turn, told him to call the Coast Guard. Although he eventually did, Bain waited until 11:45 a.m. to do so, a whole 9 hours later. He has never answered as to why he waited so long between finding out she was missing and contacting the Coast Guard. Sam's family find Bain's behavior to be rather suspicious, with her father noting, "It just drives me nuts. What happened between 2 and 11:45 in the morning? He didn't shout and holler. He didn't ask for nobody. He just made a phone call to the police. There's just no answers." Adding fuel to the fire that Ryan Bain is a distrustful character is the fact that he refused to let investigators search the Siren Song. To this day, it has never been searched. He claimed that he didn't allow authorities to search the watercraft on the advice of his lawyer. More bizarrely still, Bain has repeatedly declined to be interviewed, something which has never been pushed back on, even though he is the last person to have seen Sam alive. Sam's phone, purse, and passport were all found on the catamaran and were handed over to authorities. Law enforcement in St. John searched the coastline using drones, divers, and scent dogs, but were unable to locate Sam or her remains. Furthermore, they found little evidence as to what might have taken place on the night of her disappearance. The most information they gathered was from a witness who came forward around 9 days after she went missing, claiming that they heard a scream out at sea, roughly in the direction of the Siren Song, in the small hours of March 8th, around the time Sam is believed to have gone missing. 2 weeks after she vanished, the FBI was reportedly brought in to assist with the case, although Sam's family noted that while the FBI offered to assist, their offer was turned down. Loved ones described the 41-year-old as level-headed and a strong swimmer, claiming that it would have been hugely out of character for her to have gotten up in the middle of the night to go swimming. Another friend added, "This is someone who sailed across the Atlantic without incident, only to disappear 100 feet from the shore. The pieces in the puzzle don't add up." In a BBC News report dated November 2022, it emerged that in October, Sam's family had written to the Virgin Islands Police Department requesting the release of CCTV that was shown to them 8 months earlier. The footage showed what appeared to be Sam and Bain heading to a dinghy, but the police stopped the footage before seeing Sam and Bain board his dinghy. In the letter, Brenda Street, Sam's mother, wrote, "I would like all of it, not a shortened version shown on the day I was there on the island. This crucial bit of footage displays surroundings, people, actions, and behaviors, and information that may have been missed." It was later reported that the VIPD refused to show the parents the remainder of the tape or release it, as it would, quote, "jeopardize the ongoing investigation." Sam's family also noted that in the CCTV, she was wearing a different outfit to what had been described by Bain. In the footage, she is wearing a skirt or shorts, not the black floral dress Bain had described. Furthermore, Sam's parents never received the black dress when her belongings were returned to them. Other criticisms leveled at the VIPD include their failure to communicate with Sam's family. Her mother, Brenda, told the BBC, "They just seem to try and push it under the carpet. I had an email from the VIPD a couple of weeks ago. That's the first time in 18 months. It said, 'Hope you're doing well. Have you any further information?' My relationship with the authorities is non-existent. They just ignore us. We sent a long list of questions, lawful and legal ones, but they just didn't reply." Furthermore, in 2023, it came to light that the 911 call to the Coast Guard made by Ryan Bain was not recorded. The Coast Guard claimed that this had occurred due to a fault in the system. In November 2021, the siren song was put up for sale with its name removed. Locals in Grenada, where it was moored, alerted Sam's family to this. They called for a full forensic search of the boat before it went to new owners. This has not been carried out at the time of recording, and whether the watercraft has changed hands is unclear. Sam Joan Lillian Heslop is still missing, and her loved ones are desperate to find some sort of closure. Sam is originally from Southampton, England, and was 41 when she vanished in the early hours of March 8, 2020, from St. John in the Virgin Islands. Sam is described as a white female standing at 5'8", with long, dark brown hair. She has an athletic build and a large, colourful tattoo on her shoulder consisting of a seahorse, butterfly, and flower. Anyone with information about Sam's whereabouts can contact the Virgin Islands Police Criminal Investigation Bureau at 340-774-2211 or 340-778-2211. You can also contact the US Virgin Islands Crime Stoppers at 800-222-TIPS.
Vince Neil. Born February 8, 1961, Vincent Neil Wharton spent much of his childhood moving around Southern California. Though born in Hollywood, LA, he spent times in the likes of Inglewood and Watts before his family settled in the city of Glendora in Los Angeles County. As a young boy, his interests were varied. He loved surfing, baseball, wrestling, and music. In 1981, Neil became the frontman of the now acclaimed heavy metal band Motley Crue, who, at the time, had recently formed and were still finding their feet. Motley Crue has since gone on to become one of the most established metal bands in the world, having sold over 100 million records and achieved 7 platinum or multi-platinum certifications. Neil was discovered by drummer Tommy Lee Bass. They'd known each other in school, and Bass thought he would be the perfect fit for the band. They recorded their first album in 1981 and their second in 1983. It was this entry, Shout at the Devil, which brought them fame and fortune and helped them cement their legendary status. However, as the band rose to stardom, Neil and his bandmates began to spiral. During the 1980s, they were well known, as were many musicians of the time, to be using drugs, specifically cocaine, LSD, and heroin. Bass player and co-founder of the band, Nikki Sixx, became addicted to the latter at some stage. In much later interviews, Neil admitted that his substance abuse issues had started long before he joined the band, and he subsequently struggled with cocaine and heroin addiction. He and his bandmates eventually wound up in rehab due to their excessive drug use. During the early 1980s, Hanoi Rocks was an up-and-coming Finnish rock band, the first, in fact, to chart in the UK. The Japanese public adored them, and by all accounts, they were set to take the world by storm. Formed in 1979, they launched their fifth album in 1984, the second single of which was beginning to take rise in the charts. Described by music journalist Ian Fortnam as being an eye-scorching flash of amplified technicolor in an otherwise bland and monotonous world, Hanoi Rocks were destined for nothing but greatness, until it all came crashing down. In December 1984, Hanoi Rocks were on their second US tour, having sold out 2 shows in LA in just 20 minutes. Arriving on December 8th, several members of the band, including Nicholas Razzle Dingley, the drummer, and excluding frontman Michael Monroe, who was recovering from a fractured ankle, visited Vincent Neil at his home in Redondo Beach. After spending much of their time together partying, Neil and Razzle hopped into Neil's car to purchase more alcohol at a local store. However, Neil was driving under the influence, and it wasn't long before the trip descended into chaos when he lost control of the vehicle and hit an oncoming car. While the occupants of the other vehicle were seriously injured, even suffering brain damage, it was Razzle who lost the most, dying upon impact. Neil, meanwhile, suffered from some cracked ribs and superficial cuts to his face. Neil was subsequently charged with vehicular manslaughter and driving under the influence, with his blood alcohol level being 0.17, well above California's legal limit at the time, which was 0.10. In December 1985, he was sentenced to 30 days in jail and 5 years probation. He was also ordered to pay $2.6 million in restitution to the victims of the crash and participate in 200 hours of community service. He was paroled after just 2 weeks for good behavior. Though this is Neil's worst offense, he is no stranger to criminal convictions and has had a lengthy history of run-ins with law enforcement in the years since. In 2002, he was arrested for punching a record producer in a nightclub parking lot. The following year, he was arrested for assaulting a sex worker in Nevada. Between 2004 and 2016, he became embroiled in a fight that left a sound man unconscious, was arrested twice for drunk driving, was charged with battery and disorderly conduct after fighting with an ex-girlfriend, was sued for fraud, and was charged again with battery after he assaulted a woman who'd approached while asking for a photograph in Las Vegas. He was reportedly restrained by actor Nicolas Cage. Motley Crue's third album, Theatre of Pain, was dedicated to Razzle. Hanoi Rocks, meanwhile, struggled to recover from the loss of their drummer and disbanded in 1985. Lead vocalist Michael Monroe and lead guitarist Andy McCoy eventually reunited, but this new lineup was dissolved in 2009, after 8 years together. Some of the original band members, including McCoy, have spoken of their anger and distaste with the legal ramifications of Neil's actions, stating, quote, "It was a crime. Not only did Razzle die, 2 young people got crippled, and this guy sat 1 night in jail, got away with a misdemeanor." McCoy has also voiced his frustration that although other members of Motley Crue apologized, Neil never did. Johnny Lewis. Born on October 29th, 1983, Jonathan Kendrick Lewis grew up in Los Angeles. Better known by the name Johnny Lewis, he was the middle of 3 children, and his parents were avid Scientologists. After graduating from high school, he left home to pursue a career in acting. In his late teens, Lewis began receiving guest roles in various American drama series, including Criminal Minds and Malcolm in the Middle. In 2004, he made his first film appearance as Engelbert Kerry Wilson, a side character in the Hilary Duff film Raise Your Voice. The following year, he appeared in Underclassmen, an action comedy starring Nick Cannon. Between 2005 and 2006, he played Dennis Chili Childress on The OC, and he also starred in the 5th season of Smallville. However, Lewis is perhaps best known for his role as Kip Half-Sack Epps in the first 2 seasons of Sons of Anarchy. In 2009, he decided to leave this role and asked to be written out of the show. The series creator, Kurt Sutter, noted, quote, "Johnny wasn't happy. Creatively, he really wanted out of his contract." Lewis's father added, quote, "He told us he left because the show was getting into gratuitous violence. He didn't want to communicate that as an artist." Lewis then appeared in a few low-budget and short films after his Sons of Anarchy exit, seemingly happy living off the money he'd already earned while he worked on his debut novel, reportedly about a gifted musician in San Francisco. Around this time, he found out that his girlfriend was pregnant, but by 2010, the couple had split up. They attempted to live together for the sake of their daughter, but Lewis eventually moved out. Afterwards, the pair became embroiled in a long and painful custody battle, which he ultimately lost. In late October 2011, Lewis lost control of his motorbike and crashed. Though he was checked by hospital staff for signs of concussion, he showed none and was discharged. Those who knew the 27-year-old, however, became concerned by his conduct following the accident. His behavior became increasingly bizarre and erratic, and his father encouraged him to undergo several MRIs, all of which Lewis refused. To make matters worse, his strange behavior soon escalated, and he became violent. On January 3rd, 2012, Lewis left his parents' home in Northridge to go for a walk. Still in pajama bottoms and a t-shirt, he made his way through the neighborhood, but soon came across what he thought were cries of distress coming from a nearby unit. He decided to break in, but the home was empty. Moments later, 2 men arrived on the scene and asked the 27-year-old to leave. Instead of complying, Lewis went after the 2 men with a bottle. He struck them both on the head and became engaged in a physical altercation with the 2, even biting one of them on the arm. He was eventually overpowered and restrained until law enforcement arrived on the scene. Lewis was charged with trespassing, burglary, and assault with a deadly weapon. He claimed he was acting in self-defense and was placed in jail. 3 days later, he was moved to a psychiatric ward after he reportedly banged his head into concrete and attempted to leap from the 2nd floor of the prison. For 72 hours, he remained in psychiatric care. His discharge summary read, "Chief complaint, blunt head trauma, and suicidal." After 8 days in jail, Lewis was returned to his parents. He came home with 2 black eyes, his sister recalling, "He looked like a wounded, broken animal." His family noted that he didn't want anyone touching or coming near him, and he became hypersensitive to light, eventually disabling the fuse box in the house so that the lights couldn't ever be turned on. Unfortunately, things never got better for the actor. He attempted to take his own life in the following weeks, leaving his friends and family to take turns looking after him and never letting him go out alone. Around a month later, his family deemed that he was more stable and they allowed him to live alone in Santa Monica. But less than 2 weeks later, on February 10th, he was arrested for knocking a man out outside a store. After he was released on bail, he walked into the ocean in Santa Monica fully clothed and was hospitalized for hypothermia. A week later, on February 18th, he was arrested once more, this time for attempting to break into a woman's home. He was released on bail again. A few months passed, and by May of 2012, friends commented that they didn't recognize him, describing him as someone who, quote, "had a look I've only seen in disturbed veterans of war. His memory was scattered. He vacillated between basic lucid conversation and incoherence." Lewis was prescribed medication for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, but refused to take them. His father noted that he never received a clear diagnosis. Was he suffering from mental illness, or did he have an undiagnosed brain injury? A probation officer at the time noted his concern, quote, "for the well-being not only of the community, but that of the defendant," adding that Lewis appeared to be suffering from mental health issues, and that he believed he would, quote, "continue to be a threat to any community, he may reside in. Things finally came to a head on September 26, 2012, when 28-year-old Johnny Lewis was found dead in LA at the writer's villa where he lived. He had stayed at the bed and breakfast in 2009 and moved back into the villa at some point in 2012. The property was owned and operated by 81-year-old Catherine Harris and was inhabited by up-and-coming Hollywood stars, be they actors, writers, or directors. At the scene, not only did the police discover Lewis, but they also found his landlady, deceased, and her pet cat, who had been killed and discarded on the bathroom floor. The LAPD had been called to the scene after the neighbors had been violently attacked by Lewis, and they'd heard Catherine screaming. A later autopsy showed that she had died by manual strangulation and blunt force trauma to her head, with the coroner's report noting that the murder was particularly violent, having obliterated the left side of her face. Her nose was split down the middle, and her upper jaw was split open. 4 puncture wounds were found on her left cheek, likely from the mechanical pencil found beside her body. Lewis, meanwhile, had fled back to Catherine's property after attacking his neighbors, before falling from the roof or garage, dying upon impact. His autopsy revealed that he had no drugs or alcohol in his system at the time of his death, despite the speculation that he'd suffered drug-induced psychosis at the time of the attack, as he had a history of substance abuse. His death was ruled accidental, as there was no evidence he'd been pushed or that he'd jumped willingly from the roof. The motive behind the attack on Catherine is unclear, but one rumor among her friends was that she told him off for turning off the electricity in her home, which led to Lewis punching her several times before strangling her. While there was a hammer found in his room, it's unclear if he used it. Investigators speculated that Lewis stomped on Catherine's skull before turning his rage to her cat. Friends and family expressed shock at the news of Lewis's death and his actions before dying. In the wake of his demise, Sons of Anarchy creator Kurt Sutter tweeted, "It was a tragic end for an extremely talented guy who unfortunately had lost his way. I wish I could say that I was shocked by the events last night, but I was not. I am deeply sorry that an innocent life had to be thrown into his destructive path. Yes, it's a day of mourning, but it's also a day of awareness and gratitude. Sadly, some of us carry the message by dying." Oscar Pistorius. Oscar Pistorius was born on November 22, 1986, in Sandton, Johannesburg, South Africa. The middle of 3 children, he was born with fibula hemimelia, the congenital absence of the fibula or calf bone in both legs. At the age of 11, Pistorius had the lower half of his legs amputated, but it didn't slow him down. Throughout his school career, he proved himself to be a star athlete, playing rugby and water polo and attending wrestling classes. He was a keen fitness enthusiast and trained at a gym in Pretoria, with the gym owner remarking that for 6 months they didn't even realize Pistorius had no legs, as he was such a capable athlete, participating in exercise regimes that included boxing, skipping, and press-ups. In 2003, at the age of 17, he injured his knee during rugby. While undergoing rehabilitation, he was introduced to running and quickly took to the sport. Shortly afterwards, he had his first racing blades fitted by an expert prosthesist in South Africa, but was eventually referred to an American prosthesist and Paralympic sprintist named Brian Frasher, so he could be fitted for special blades made by an Icelandic company, as ordinary blades broke too quickly. From 2004 onwards, Pistorius began competing in professional running events, including the 2004 Summer Paralympics, during which he came 3rd overall in the 100-meter event for single below-knee amputees. He also qualified for the 200-meter event final, which he subsequently won with a world record time of 21.97 seconds. In the following 8 years, Pistorius continued to compete in professional running events, taking home numerous gold medals, as well as several silver and a few bronze. As well as competing in sprint events for below-knee amputees, he also participated in non-disabled sprinting events. He is listed as the 10th athlete to compete in both the Paralympic Games and the Olympic Games, and in 2011, at the World Championships in Athletics, he became the first amputee to win a non-disabled world track medal. During this period of Pistorius' life, he was known for his incredible athletic feats and dubbed Blade Runner by the public and the media. Today, he is better known for the infamous shooting of his girlfriend. On February 14, 2013, the police were alerted to a shooting that had taken place on Pistorius' property. At the time, his girlfriend, 29-year-old Riva Steenkamp, was staying with him. Pistorius and Riva had met in 2012. She was considered an A-lister on the South African celebrity circuit and was often part of the Johannesburg party scene. After graduating from university with a Bachelor of Laws degree in 2005, she began working as a paralegal and as a model, becoming the face of Avon Cosmetics, starring in campaigns for the jewelry company Savannah Diamonds, and becoming a cover girl for the FHM magazine. Investigators soon learned that Riva was the victim of the shooting at Pistorius' home. She was found dead, having been fatally shot in the head and arm. Pistorius would later claim he'd mistaken his girlfriend for an intruder and shot 4 times through a locked bathroom door. 3 of these bullets hit Riva. Pistorius subsequently broke down the bathroom door with a cricket bat and reportedly attempted to revive the 29-year-old while calling for help. One of the first to arrive on the scene was a neighbor and doctor who attempted to open up Riva's airways using a jaw lift maneuver. However, he noted that she had no pulse, showed no signs of breathing, and her pupils were fixed and dilated. Attempts to resuscitate her were futile. Pistorius admitted to authorities during a hearing 5 days later that he had shot Riva 4 times, but that he'd thought she was an intruder. He pleaded not guilty, adding that he had been frightened by the noise and was in a vulnerable state of mind without his prosthetic legs. Still, he was charged with murder, and his trial began on March 3, 2014, in Pretoria High Court. On May 20th, the trial was postponed so that Pistorius could undergo psychiatric evaluation. While he was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, the trial was resumed on June 30th, as it was established that his disorder would not skew his notion of right and wrong, and he could be held criminally liable for his actions. Neighbors testified hearing the blood-curdling scream of a woman on the night of the incident, as well as gunshots and a man yelling for help. Prosecutors claimed that Pistorius had argued with Riva that night, which had caused her to lock herself in the bathroom, away from him. During the trial, Pistorius took to the stand to defend himself. He offered an apology to Riva's family, but continued to maintain that the shooting had been an accident. Though he openly wept in court, there were rumors, later denied by Pistorius, that he'd taken acting lessons in the months before his court appearance. Closing arguments in the case were heard on August 7th and 8th. The following month, on September 12th, Pistorius was found guilty of culpable homicide. In South Africa, culpable homicide is defined as the unlawful, negligent killing of a human being, and is similar to the US ruling of involuntary manslaughter. Pistorius was also found guilty of one firearm-related charge of reckless endangerment relating to an incident where a firearm was discharged in a restaurant. On October 21st, he was given 5 years maximum for culpable homicide and a concurrent 3-year suspended sentence for the firearm conviction. On October 19th, 2015, however, less than 1 year later, Pistorius was released from prison. He was subsequently placed under house arrest and correctional supervision for the next 4 years. Riva's family, meanwhile, spoke of forgiveness and empathy, stating, quote, "I didn't want him to be thrown in jail and suffering, because I don't wish suffering on anyone, and that's not going to bring Riva back." Less than 2 months later, on December 3rd, a South African appeals court overturned his previous conviction and ruled he was guilty of first-degree murder. The court stated their belief that a dismissal of circumstantial evidence and a misinterpretation of the laws had caused the prosecution to only charge Pistorius with the lesser crime of culpable homicide the year before. Judge Eric Leach noted, quote, "I have no doubt that, in firing the fatal shots, the accused must have foreseen, and therefore did foresee, that whoever was behind the toilet door might die, but reconciled himself to that event occurring and gambled with that person's life. The identity of his victim is irrelevant to his guilt." As a result of this new ruling, in the summer of 2016, Pistorius was sentenced to 6 years in prison for Riva's murder. Though for many it was an improvement over his 4 years of house arrest, the South African National Prosecuting Authority argued that it was far too lenient a sentence and disproportionate to the crime. A new sentence was therefore handed down the following year. Pistorius, now 31, was given 13 years and 5 months behind bars. A Supreme Court justice named Willie Cerruti noted that the former sports star had failed to explain why he fired the fatal shots and pointed out his lack of remorse during court hearings. He added that the previous sentence of 6 years was shockingly lenient, to a point where it has the effect of trivializing this serious offense. In the years since Pistorius entered the prison system, June Steenkamp has set up a foundation in her daughter's name, aiming to highlight violence against women and children. 10 years later, she still grieves for Reva, stating, "We just love her so much and miss her. Part of her life is gone, but we will see her one day, and that is what we look forward to." Joe Pitchler. Born on Valentine's Day, 1987, in Bremerton, Washington, Joseph David Wolfgang Pitchler began his acting career when he was just 4 years old. One of 5 children, he managed to get cast in a string of TV commercials as a child, with his family moving to LA to help him pursue his dream. In 1996, at the age of 9, he played a small role in the thriller film The Fan with Robert De Niro and Wesley Snipes, before eventually getting a part in the 1999 movie Varsity Blues, one of his most well-known roles. Things only got better for Joe in 2000, when he was cast as one of the main characters in the movies Beethoven's Third and Beethoven's Fourth, both family comedy films following the antics of a St. Bernard dog. Around this time, Joe told the media, "I've said no to sex and drugs. I don't want to get typecast. I'd much rather do movies. I like the whole atmosphere of changing characters and meeting new people." In 2002, Joe made his last 2 appearances on screen. He starred in 2 episodes of The Nightmare Room, a children's anthology horror series, and the movie Children on Their Birthdays, an independent comedy drama. In 2003, his mother, Kathy, decided that Joe needed a break from Hollywood. She was concerned that he would burn out and wanted him to be able to complete his education, stating, "I just wanted him to have some normalcy in his life. He's a good boy and took it well, but he wasn't really happy about it." During his acting hiatus, Joe returned to his hometown where he finished high school, moved into his own apartment, and took a full-time position as a telephone technician at Teletech. He still dreamt of pursuing acting though, telling his family that once his braces were removed, he would return to Hollywood. Tragically, Joe disappeared before he was able to do so. Joe was last seen on February 5th, 2006. He met with friends earlier that day, who noted that he was in good spirits, but at around 4:15 a.m., he called a friend from his mobile phone. The friend described 18-year-old Joe as sobbing and being inconsolable. He ended the call by saying he would ring back in an hour, but he never did. Nobody heard from Joe again after this point. 4 days later, his silver Toyota Corolla was discovered. It had been abandoned half a mile from Port Washington Narrows, a large body of water. There was a note and poems left behind in the vehicle, where Joe expressed his desire to be a stronger brother for his siblings. He also stated that he wanted his younger brother, Matthew, to have some of his belongings. Investigators strongly believe that the note left behind indicated Joe had taken his own life. However, his family disagreed, noting that he was not depressed at the time of his disappearance. Though some reports observe that he was recreationally engaging in drugs and alcohol when he went missing, he was not known to have any issues related to either substance. His sister, Shauna, told Kitsap's son, "He's probably too embarrassed to come home. In the worst case scenario, if anything, it's foul play, but not suicide." One brother added, "He left that note saying he wanted to start over." His mother also stated that Joe had left the door to his apartment unlocked and the lights on, which was unusual. She also alleged that someone had broken into his home, claiming that some of her son's most valuable Magic the Gathering cards had been taken. Kathy would later claim that the police investigated no other avenues, staunch in their belief that Joe had taken his own life. She said one police detective told her, "I don't know how to say this to you without sounding really bad, but basically I think your son's dead, and it could take months for him to show up in the water." Despite mass searches for any sign of Joe or his body, he has never been found. His wallet and car keys were missing from the scene where his vehicle was located. 18-year-old Joe Pitchler was last seen on January 5, 2006 in Bremerton, Washington. He is described as a white male with light brown hair and green or hazel eyes. He still had braces on his upper teeth, but his lower set had been removed at the time. He is 6'2" and weighed 170 pounds when he was last seen. Joe also had a Star Wars Rebel Alliance logo tattoo on his right forearm and a small scar across the bridge of his nose. When Joe was last seen, he was possibly wearing a brown t-shirt and jeans, and a white metal watch on his left wrist. He may have been depressed at the time of his disappearance, and he normally carries an inhaler for his allergies, but did not have it with him at the time of his disappearance. He is allergic to dust mites, cats, dogs, and birds, among many other things. He uses the nicknames Joe and Josie. If Joe is still alive, he will be 37 years old. If you have any information about his case, you can contact the Bremerton Police Department at 360-473-5228. Harold Holt. In 1966, Harold Holt became Australia's 17th Prime Minister. A politician and lawyer, he entered Parliament at the age of 27 and became a government minister at the age of 31. By all accounts, Harold was a keen outdoorsman. He had homes in numerous coastal towns, including Portsea, Victoria, and Bingle Bay, Queensland. He practiced spearfishing and enjoyed skin diving and snorkeling, noting that he found air tanks to be burdensome. His friends described Harold as having incredible powers of endurance underwater, and he reportedly would see how long he could hold his breath during parliamentary debates, just for his own entertainment. While he was able to tread water for long periods of time, he was reportedly not a strong surface swimmer. He had been repeatedly warned by friends and colleagues about the dangers of his hobby. Concern for him increased on May 20th, 1967, when he had a close call while diving at a beach near Point Nepean in Victoria. During a swim, he became distressed and called for help. He was fortunately rescued by his diving companions, and though he remained conscious, he reportedly turned purple and vomited seawater. Harold later claimed that a leaking snorkel was responsible for the event. Though Harold was in good health at the time of his disappearance, it has been observed that he had a family history of premature death. His father died age 59 and his brother age 57. In September 1967, just a few months before he went missing, Harold began receiving treatment for a shoulder injury which dated back to his youth. He had injured himself in a sporting match as a young man, and the injury had recently become painful again. He was subsequently prescribed painkillers and twice-weekly physiotherapy. His doctor advised him to cut back on swimming and tennis to avoid overexerting himself. On Sunday, December 17th, 1967, at around 11:15 a.m., Harold and 4 friends set out for Point Nepean. They hoped to catch a glimpse of solo circumnavigator Alec Rose, who was supposed to pass through the rip into Port Phillip Bay. The yacht, however, wasn't very visible, so between that and the extreme heat, the group didn't stay long. While driving back to Portsea, Harold suggested they stop off at a local beach for a swim so they could cool off. By all accounts, he knew the beach well and had been there on numerous different occasions. Despite the water looking rather turbulent, the group stopped by the beach and Harold headed into the water. Alan Stewart, one of his companions, headed in with him. The other 3 members of the group stayed on land as the water looked rough. Alan recalled staying close to the shore and noticing a strong undertow. Harold, meanwhile, ventured in further. He was eventually caught up in the current and dragged out to sea. He did not call for help or indicate that he was distressed, but moments later, he was gone from sight. Following the incident, the police were contacted and the Australian Defence Force was put on high alert. The search for Harold began at 1:30 p.m., but amateur divers found the water to be too rough for exploration. Helicopters, watercraft, naval diving teams, and police divers all aided in the search for Harold, but again, the difficult conditions and limited available equipment meant that no one was able to make much progress. Rescuers that day described the sea as being heavy, rolling, and noted that the waves were 6 to 8 feet high, even as the tide receded. Things didn't improve in the evening, with the rough conditions being likened to being inside a washing machine. A second search was launched just before 5 a.m. the following morning, despite poor weather conditions, including torrential rain driven by a howling gale, but was suspended after a change in tide at around 8 a.m. Another hunt the following day was hampered once more by bad weather. Ultimately, efforts to recover Harold's body were called off on January 5, 1986. Up to 300 people were involved in the search at its peak, and no trace of the Prime Minister was found. The only thing remaining of him was the small pile of clothes he had left behind on the beach. A member of one of the naval diving teams noted, any chance of finding the Prime Minister was lost by Sunday night. Following Harold's disappearance, numerous theories emerged about what may have happened to him. Most people agree that he was lost at sea, but there is much debate about what exactly occurred. Some speculated that he simply underestimated the harshness of the conditions and became exhausted trying to keep afloat. Others theorized he suffered a heart attack. Other suggestions included that he was stung by jellyfish, attacked by a shark, or struck by driftwood. His body most likely was washed out to sea, though senior pathologist James McNamara at the time suggested to officials that his body had been trapped by kelp and eaten by sea creatures. If this is what happened to Harold, then the body would have been reduced to a skeleton in a period as short as 24 to 48 hours. There are other theories regarding Harold's disappearance. It is perhaps not unexpected that the vanishing of a politician would lead to conspiracy theories. Some believe that his death involved some sort of cover-up at the highest level of government. In 1968, the Sunday Observer published a story that claimed Harold had been killed by the CIA because he planned to pull Australian troops out of Vietnam. Similarly, there were theories that he was killed by the North Vietnamese. Over 10 years after his death, in 1983, journalist Anthony Gray claimed that Harold had been a lifelong spy for the People's Republic of China, alleging that the Prime Minister faked his death to defect back to China. Other theories included that Harold took his own life or faked his death to be with a lover. Both of these theories have been rejected by his family members, as well as colleagues and friends, as has the notion that Harold was a Chinese spy. Rico Harris. Born May 19, 1977, in Los Angeles, California, Rico Harris was the oldest of 4 children. His father, Henry Harris, was a former star forward for Idaho State who had been playing semi-professionally in LA, and it wasn't long before Rico began showing his own impressive athletic abilities. During Rico's teen years and early 20s, he became known for his NBA-level potential. He attended Temple City High School at the age of 17, where he is credited with turning around the school's basketball team, putting them on the map, and drawing in university scouts. The Press-Telegram, a newspaper published in Long Beach, noted that he was one of the best high school players in the western United States during the 1994 to 1995 season. Rico's university career, though, wasn't so successful. He bounced between universities for various reasons. He failed a specific class, making him ineligible to attend one school. He was arrested on charge of unlawful imprisonment at one point, and he eventually began drinking and partying. Los Angeles City College teammates, though, noted that his skill in the game was never affected, with one noting he probably didn't get no sleep and was up all night. Then he dropped like 35 points that game. Still, he'd later be described as a disruptive influence, and he was, at one point, suspended for 6 games. Rico continued to drink. He became socially isolated, and his long-term girlfriend left him. Though recruiters continued to approach him, he didn't respond. He believed they were only interested in his basketball skills, and not his personal development. In the spring of 2000, he joined the Harlem Globetrotters, which seemed to be a perfect fit for him. However, Just a month into his career, he got into a fight while out in LA and was struck on the back of the head with a baseball bat. Though he managed to escape the scene, intense headaches and balance issues arose as a result of the assault. He left the Globetrotters at the age of 24. Over the next few years, Rico would deal with alcohol and drug abuse issues, which would lead him to be arrested over 100 times, mostly for public intoxication. In 2007, at the age of 30, he finally began to get things together after an overdose led him to be sent to a rehab facility. Upon his release, he attempted to live a normal life, securing housing, picking up a job as a security guard, and eventually meeting Jennifer Song. The two began dating shortly afterwards. By September of 2014, the pair were discussing marriage. Rico eventually left California to be with Jennifer in Seattle. Here, Rico managed to get a job interview as a property appraiser and exchanged his California driver's license for a Washington one. Though he and Jennifer struggled to adjust from being a long-distance couple to living together, Rico was looking to make it work. He wanted to have a fresh start in Seattle. On October 8th, he drove from Seattle to Alhambra to speak with his mother and collect some clothes. His girlfriend, Jennifer, would later tell the media that she believed Rico had also gone to visit his mother for some closure regarding things in the past. Quote, "I think he realized some things and wanted to talk to his mother. He wanted her to trust him and trust us and believe in our relationship." His mother, Margaret, would later state that she didn't believe Rico got what he wanted from the conversation. Shortly after midnight, Rico began the journey back to Seattle. Records show that after leaving Alhambra, he drove north on Interstate 5. He then stopped 40 miles south of Sacramento to get petrol. He called Jennifer at 10:45 a.m. on October 10th, leaving a message which said he was going up into the mountains to rest, as he hadn't slept much after leaving Seattle. At 11:15 a.m., the phone was turned off. On October 13th, 2014, a deputy for the Yolo County Sheriff's Office found a Nissan in the parking lot at the Cache Creek Regional Park. He thought nothing of it until the following day, when he noticed the vehicle was still there. When he checked the registration, he learned that the Nissan belonged to Rico Harris, who had been missing since October 10th. The car's gas tank was empty, and its battery was dead. The inside looked as if it had been ransacked. A short time later, his mobile phone was found in the park. The battery was dead, but the device was undamaged. A black backpack was propped up against the guardrail nearby. It contained a few jumper cables and some clothing and 2 bottles filled with alcohol and an energy drink. Once the phone was charged, investigators recovered a video Rico appeared to have filmed of himself unintentionally, sitting in his car at the park, looking through paperwork from his glove box and carelessly tossing it into the back seat as music blasted from his speakers. The video was from the night of October 10th. Around October 18th, tracks were discovered in the sand by Cache Creek. They had not been there the previous day, and though a cast could not be made of them, they seemed big enough to match Rico's large shoe size. That same day, a tall, broad individual walking along State Route 16 was noted by a passing driver. Other sightings of a similar figure were reported this same week, but none have ever been confirmed as being Rico. Rico Harris has never been heard from again since his disappearance. Investigators on the case do not believe that he met with foul play, but that he willingly came to the park. There were no signs of a struggle around the vehicle, and his backpack and phone bear no marks that they were taken by force. They believe Rico left his phone to avoid being tracked or accidentally forgot the device along with his backpack. Authorities theorized that he may have taken a wrong turn after getting petrol and wound up in the park, where he decided to stop so he could take a nap. They have suggested that when he woke up, he decided not to return to Seattle yet, and instead wandered around in the wilderness. By the time he came back to his car, it was gone because it had been towed by investigators. They theorized that he then hitched a ride to another town. The LA Times spoke with Rico's stepfather, who recalled his last conversation with the 37-year-old, where he expressed doubts about whether or not moving to Seattle was the right decision. When his stepfather asked why he was doing it, he responded, "I'm ashamed of the things that happened down here, and I want to start another life." Investigators added that in the footage of Rico in his car, he seemed like a free man. His mother, Margaret, stated, "He could be alive. Maybe he's not. I don't know what the truth is. I don't know. People don't just vanish." She added, "Something sinister is lurking in that part of California. Rico, you are not forgotten, ever. I am not giving up on finding my son." 37-year-old Rico Harris has been missing since October 10th, 2014. He is described as an African-American male with short dark hair and brown eyes. He is 6'9" and weighed 280 pounds at the time of his disappearance. If you have information on Rico's disappearance, you can call the Yolo County Tip Hotline at 530-668-5248. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own theories and speculations, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.